a lot of numbers. Is there a way that I can make sure that this... there we go. So during the time you guys are sitting here today, the next 2 days, 47 new millionaires will be created just in Colombia alone. Globally, there'll be 3,800 millionaires that will be created globally. So essentially, since the year 2024 and through 25, 1,900 new millionaires were created basically every single day. But what if I told you you could be in a more exclusive class for just $1 of Bitcoin? Because right now, there is 62 million millionaires globally, and there's just about 1 million wallets that have over 1 Bitcoin. An even lesser amount, there's 50 million wallets that have just $1 Bitcoin or more. So when you break it all down, all of you guys sitting in this room here today, if you have Bitcoin in cold storage, you're in a more exclusive class here today than being a millionaire, which, to be honest, used to mean something. And unfortunately, due to inflation, through the Colombian peso, the US dollar, it doesn't mean as much anymore. So if you look at how millionaires have essentially been created throughout this past few years, it's been accelerating. There's just under 1,900 that are created every single day, and it's a 1% to 2% that get created more every single year. So the UBS is projecting that there's going to be another 5.3 million new millionaires by the year 2029. So that's not even just my projection or anything like that. They're straight up telling you now at this point that it is becoming a lot easier to become a millionaire. And simply all you need to do really is maybe have some real estate in the United States or have some real estate somewhere else and just sit on it, and everything just gets inflated away. And I brought up real estate because 90% of millionaires own real estate, but it is, if you price it in Bitcoin, obviously it's going down just in the traditional asset value. And there's a lot of hidden costs when it comes to real estate. Especially in the United States, there's, taxes, insurance, the cost of lumber. A lot of things have gone up that have made the median price of a home in the United States and globally just increase drastically. And if you price the median home in Bitcoin, on the other hand, obviously it's gone down significantly. So if you're able to, save for a house, essentially the best method to do that now is just to hold Bitcoin and simply just wait. Real estate traditionally was the biggest wealth creation tool that people use globally. And I think now that is going to shift to Bitcoin just because of lower overhead and everything else. And I'll get into why I think that that's going to accelerate here in a second. But another way that millionaires, traditionally invest and become millionaires is through the stock market. So this is a chart here showing the global M2 money supply and the S&P 500. For those of you guys who don't know, the M2 money supply is simply just the amount of liquidity in the overall market. And, it's kind of hard to tell, but there is 2 different lines up there. They do correlate very closely. So essentially, even though, with inflation, they tell you that it's, at 3% or maybe even less. If you look at the amount of liquidity in the money supply circulating right now, it's essentially just dead even with the amount that the S&P 500, which is just the global index of the United States stock market. So at the end of the day, real estate and the S&P 500 and global stock markets, they all are simply just following inflation. And it's under this ruse that you're actually making money. So that leads me to why we are all here today, and that is Bitcoin. So even with, Bitcoin as the projected slowdown, Michael Saylor has lined out a base, bear, and bull case for where he thinks Bitcoin is going. And this is a slide that he gave a presentation on in 2024. So he's updated these numbers a little bit, but essentially he lined out in his entire thesis that Bitcoin is going to be taking up these large pools of capital, these large markets. And I'm going to get into why I actually think that's going to accelerate and why Michael Saylor's, even his bull case, is a little bit bearish, because Just from the factors I was lining out here earlier, we have Saylor creating products that are scooping up the $300 trillion global bond market. We have Saylor creating products that is scooping up the $145 trillion fixed income market. And then he's also talking about the $200 trillion credit market. So he's talking about scooping up just a small percentage of those assets and what that would do to Bitcoin's market cap, and it would make it absolutely explode and go parabolic. Now, Bitcoin is still a very young asset when it comes down to it. If you look at it by market cap and where it is, a lot of people think, okay, I might have missed the boat. Bitcoin is, sitting right around $100,000 right now. If you look at it in the lens of these other assets, right? We had silver essentially double, go from a little over a $2 trillion asset to about a $5 trillion asset in just a few short months. And then gold had a 60% return last year as well. So even though the narrative that Saylor has presented is that Bitcoin is going to have diminishing returns because that typically is what happened when an asset grows, I think the gold and silver markets kind of prove that incorrect here. Or at least that is my thesis here, because, like I said, when you break it all down, there's still just 62 million millionaires in the world. 1 million wallets have 1 Bitcoin or more. And then there's 50 million wallets with just $1 worth of Bitcoin. So as I stated at the beginning of this talk, you guys all sitting here are in a more exclusive class here today than being a millionaire if you just have $1 worth of Bitcoin in a cold storage wallet. And so at the end of the day, when these millionaires start to figure out, and people start to figure out that Bitcoin is the true best way to save your money, that's going to drastically change, and I think that will accelerate. So that's why I think we are still very early when it comes to Bitcoin, and that's why I think Michael Saylor is actually going to be wrong when it comes to his price predictions and how much it goes in. So I'm lining this out here because when you guys look at Bitcoin over the past 12 years, right, it's had an cumulative average growth rate of 77%, which sounds like a lot, and a lot of people think that those returns are going to be diminishing. I can never get to a full Bitcoin. If you look at the numbers here, it's simply impossible for everybody, or globally to get to one full Bitcoin. But at the end of the day, if you can just scoop up a small percentage of it, it's going to be significantly more valuable, and you'll have a better return on your money than, say, investing in the S&P 500. You won't need as much capital to get into that. You won't need as much capital to invest into real estate, for example. And Bitcoin is even beating Warren Buffett, who's known as potentially the best investor of our lifetimes here. So that's all to say, this is why I believe Saylor is wrong, because Bitcoin is the true scarce asset, and it's something like we've never necessarily seen before. Because at the end of the day, there's a fixed supply of 21 million. River put out this study that, Satoshi, the original wallet, has nearly 1 million Bitcoin. There's an estimated 1.5, a little bit more, lost right now. So in total, there's just about 18.5 million Bitcoin just available for the circulating supply, and there's still just about 1.2 million left to be mined here at the time of this study, which I think was like about maybe a year or so ago. So the amount of Bitcoin that is truly fixed and available for sale is decreasing every single day because people like yourselves are putting Bitcoin in cold storage and really starting to utilize the true power of Bitcoin. And that is being shown in this chart right here. This is the number of Bitcoin on exchanges. So you've seen, over the past couple years, that started at about 3.5 million Bitcoin on exchanges, so Coinbases, Binances, wherever you guys typically get started and buy Bitcoin. They were the true bag holders originally, and everybody has been seemingly taking Bitcoin off exchanges and holding it in cold storage. So this is another reason why Bitcoin is just significantly different than any other asset that we've seen before, because you can't necessarily go and take your real estate from Colombia, let's say, or and move it to another place. It simply is just there, and taxes and everything else. They could technically take your property if they really wanted to. And similarly with stocks, you all have that on a brokerage account, and it's not necessarily yours. Bitcoin, on the other hand, is that true asset where you could actually own that property. And then there's a bunch of now Bitcoin treasuries and entities coming in. So even though we saw a negative price action, let's say, last year, we did see a massive increase in the amount of entities holding Bitcoin. Now, this is another reason why I think self-custody and the individual is very important, just because now we're starting to see large pools of capital come in and buy. So I think when you break it all down at the end of the day, Bitcoin, because it is a fixed supply, we know built into the code that there's going to be 450 Bitcoin mined every single day. And when you look at this buying pressure, it's only a matter of time before we really start to see the price action take off, and it's going to be harder to get that $1 of Bitcoin or that 1,000,000 sats or whatever that amount of Bitcoin that you are really aiming for. It's just going to continually get harder over time, simply because now the big players are here. So we're going to continue. While we see all of these numbers here, it's simply just math, right? As Greg Foss always says. So, at the end of the day, I really just wanted to point out to you guys that we're coming here, even though we've got Bitcoin nearly at $100,000, and we've seen Bitcoin and the sentiment seems very down. I think we're still very early. When you guys look at the numbers of Bitcoin on exchanges, Bitcoin in wallets with $1 or more, it really just lines that out to me, and I hope it helps really paint a picture for you guys that at the end of the day, we're still in a very infant stage of the development of Bitcoin, and there's still a lot to be done. So thank you guys all for joining me here today, and make sure to check me out on Green Candle on YouTube and X, where I blab about this stuff all the time. So I hope you guys enjoyed this, and shout out to the organizers and Bitcoin Medellin for allowing me to start off this great conference. And I'll see you guys all around. Thank you so much.
Am I still on? All right. So is everybody sufficiently caffeinated here? All right, good. Thank you, Brandon. I always like to see somebody more bullish than Saylor. I always doubt it's possible, but then I find a guy like him, and he's man after my heart. I'm wildly bullish Bitcoin this year as well. And before I get started, I'm going to talk about mining, hence the mining rig up there. Run Saz Mining is the CEO and co-founder. But before I get into all that, I just want to say thank you to the organizers. I didn't realize until last night at the dinner that we had for the speakers that Rainier was picking up the slack from John. And so anyway, just wanted to give a shout out to you, Rainier, for pulling this together. One of my favorite conferences last year, and fun to be back here this year talking about what I love and am passionate about in the Bitcoin ecosystem, which is mining. And the mining situation here is one that I think most Bitcoiners think is optional, and I don't think it is. And I'm going to make a case here today that we all must be mining, not just need to or should be. And I have a unique background in that I've been 12 years out of the U.S. now as an expat, lived in 2 different countries, traveled 26, find myself more comfortable in Latin America at this point than the U.S. And across the world, when it comes to mining, I find that there's just there's not been many folks that have come into mining and looked at it through a Bitcoiner's lens. And so I'm going to try to do that here today, look at it from a Bitcoiner's lens and talk through why we must mine. And getting to that point, I want to actually just lay some definitions, because these are definitions that I don't hear talked about frequently. And the first is the novel innovation of Bitcoin itself, which is actually two. We know and love the decentralized ledger aspect, but when the first block was mined, that actually introduced a second novel innovation, which is a decentralized money printer. Now, just as we can send value across the planet, if I want to send money to India, Nepal, Iran right now to help the poor people there that are going through regime change, I can do that with the decentralized ledger in a permissionless way. In the exact same way, in a very cypherpunk way, as long as I have electricity and the right hardware, I can print my own Bitcoin. Mining introduced decentralized money printing, and that actually thwarts, in my opinion, the massive Achilles heel that we've had as a species with centralized money printing for the last 4,000 plus years, right? And so that's a second innovation from where I sit. Also, by way of definitions, I want to talk about what it means to be a Bitcoiner. There's not a common definition for this, but the one I like and I use is somebody who chooses to save in Bitcoin to build a better future. Now, somebody that chooses to save, I sort of implicitly think that means self-custody, but somebody that chooses to save in Bitcoin rather than fiat has passed the, the event horizon. Right? At that point, when you see Bitcoin as your money, your worldview actually shifts as well. And that's the point at which I think somebody becomes a Bitcoiner. Now, savings from my travels is a biological imperative more so than anything, right? Everywhere I've been, I see people saving for the same life experiences. And these roughly break down into housing, some way to protect ourselves and our families from the environment, education, so a way that we can educate ourselves to produce value out in the economy or help our kids become educated so that they can when they leave the house. Marriage, so that we can have our community recognize that a couple is going to go off and start a family and, add and contribute to society through procreation. Retirement, so that we're not a burden on our kids in the future. We save. And then the last one is if we hit a speed bump. This is the one most people think of as kind of the first line of the progress towards having safety in our lives, right? Is we need emergency savings. So when we save in Bitcoin, though, something transformative happens. And I think of this as hard savings because it's hard money, right? And when you're saving in fiat, whether you realize it or not, you have a low-level anxiety because you're on a hamster wheel, right? You're running because you're needing to keep your dollars and the purchasing value, and you're constantly figuring out what I can do with this money to create more money because you recognize the dollars are melting. But when you save in Bitcoin, you save on a hard foundation. And that hard foundation orients you to the future, fundamentally. And when you're oriented to the future, you have hope. And as you have hope and your future orientation, it leads to an extension of our time horizons and what we're looking at in the future. And I would argue that aligns us with our better selves. So most people in this audience that I know recognize that we're more than our five senses. Whatever you want to call that other aspect of ourselves, it's timeless. And so the further that our time horizons extend, the more it aligns with our higher aspect. And that means that we can start to look into the future, protect future generations, and be actually at our best selves. That's when you see civilizations thrive, is when they're looking for future generations. So a lot of very positives come out of hard savings. Now, how do we get that hard savings is pretty interesting because there is a relatively unlooked at part of Bitcoin's history that is how we've gotten our Bitcoin. So if you were a Bitcoiner from circa 2010 to 2013 and you ran a node, you were also mining. There was no separation between mining Bitcoin and running a node. And so most Bitcoiners, if you meet them from that era, they have an affection for mining that doesn't exist with most Bitcoiners today. And that separation occurred because mining got difficult and the ASIC came about and it became more difficult to mine than to buy. At the same time, Coinbase, whether you love them or hate them, they opened their doors the same year. So not only did it become harder to mine, it became easier to buy. The timeline split. And that's had some downstream consequences, which I do want to mention. So the unintended consequences is we now have a community that's largely buyers and miners, right? So just quick show of hands, how many people in this room are buying Bitcoin in whatever way you're buying it? Okay, that's most people. How many people are acquiring their Bitcoin by mining it? A couple hands, right? So just point being, there's a division. If I go to a mining conference, I find very few Bitcoiners. If you go to a mining conference, you will find, or if you go to a Bitcoin conference, you generally find very few miners. And this has created mining amnesia. And what I mean by that is most of the Bitcoin community, because they're buyers, they don't really understand mining in a experiential way. And so it's created a little bit of a boogeyman around mining that I don't think should exist. And there's also been mining centralization. I'll get to that in a whole other slide. That's a whole other can of worms, but it's a real issue. Why it happened, though, I think is really interesting. So I've already touched on the fact that there's convenience, right? It's easier to buy than it is to mine. And part of that convenience comes about because of mining community failure, right? So the mining community, nobody has shown up that's actually earned the trust of the Bitcoin community. And that's largely because the mining community is focused on self-mining instead of figuring out how do we get more people into mining. Third, there's just a fundamental supply and demand mismatch, right? If you've got a short time horizon and you want a lot of Bitcoin, you're going to want to buy it rather than mine it. Mining is a way to get Bitcoin over time. And then the last one that's often not mentioned is exchange competition. If fundamentally exchanges earn their revenues from taking a cut of the fiat to Bitcoin transaction, and that means they're in competition with the mining community that wants to sell you a different way to acquire Bitcoin. So mining centralization, I do want to touch on this because this is actually really fundamental. It's an issue that I think we all, unless you've had your head in the sand, you probably care about it to a lesser degree. But the fundamental problem that I see is the Bitcoin community has ceded the network to folks that are there to get more fiat. And the pubcos are the best example of this, right? The publicly traded mining companies, they have a fiduciary responsibility, a financial responsibility, and legal responsibility to return dollars to their investors, not Bitcoin. So by definition, they're using Bitcoin as a stepping stone to get more fiat. And this has unintended consequences because that doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to stay aligned with their decision set for the Bitcoin network itself. So this can be seen in a couple of simple metrics. One is the mining pool hash rate has centralized. At this point, there's only two throats that need to be choked to actually create a double spend situation. We've got AMP pool and we've got Foundry with 44% of the hash rate. This was updated as of yesterday. And AMP pool actually has more hash rate than this because they have other mining pools that are proxies. So arguably, these two represent an attack vector on the network itself. Second, Bitmain, who is also an owner of AmpPool, owns like 70% of all the hardware that's being produced. Now, I don't want everybody to get overly pessimistic on this because the community is already working on these things and these numbers are starting to go the right direction, but these are fundamental problems. And they lead to why we need to mine. We must mine. And I'm going to give three reasons for that. There's an economic reason, there's a moral reason, which I've touched a lot on already, and then there's a strategic reason. So the economic case, I find most people kind of get overwhelmed by all the numbers with mining. So I try to make it really simple. How much does it cost to run a mining rig each month, and how much do I get for that? If you do simple numbers, this is a current offering we've got in Ethiopia at a data center. It costs about $53,000 per Bitcoin that you're mining. Now, you're not mining an entire Bitcoin, but that simple fact, that energy cost of Bitcoin is not very well known. And I think if people understood that, they'd actually be more inclined to say, yeah, mining's actually accessible. Let me look into this because you're getting more sats for the dollar. Right? And then the second point I want to make is that those are wild sats, right? They're sats that are generated outside of the banking system. And what we see with our clients is they feel more comfortable to use them. I would actually argue mine sats are more likely to prime the circular economies than bot sats. Third is getting more sats for your dollar leads to a shorter time frame to stack yourself out of the fiat ecosystem, right? So that means there's time savings that you're going to gain in your life. The moral case, I've gone on this pretty heavy already, but alignment does matter. Having more of the Bitcoin community mining is going to strengthen our social layer, right? And it's going to make us care more about the network. And I would argue if most of the Bitcoin community had been mining, the centralization issues would not have occurred because the alignment of incentives would be there. Second, the network becomes less reliant on the fiat hashers. It's kind of natural flip side of that same coin. Third, the protocol becomes more decentralized. We've got more owners of the printing press. Fourth, the community becomes more unified, meaning this sort of division that we've got right now starts to fade into the distance. The last one's the strategic one, and I know that there's some disagreement on this, but I would say that our biology influences our psychology again, and we're driven by Gresham's law. If you don't know it, Gresham's law is to hoard the good money and to use the bad. It goes clear back to Roman times when the denarii was being clipped, the silver coin was, and the merchants on the street started to hoard the denarii in the cupboards and spend the bad one. And I would argue if you've ever had a moment's pause before spending your Bitcoin, this is why, is Gresham's law at work, right? And so that whether we like it or not, I think that creates a psychological friction and burden for us to use our Bitcoin right now. I don't think it'll always be this way. I'm very happy people are building medium of exchange solutions, but I do think this is the governing factor that we're dealing with right now. And as a result of this, the store of value use case is still being proven out. And actually, Brandon had a great slide kind of showing the same thing. This is the first cycle. Whether we're in a cycle or not, I guess is still a big question at the moment. But this is the first cycle to where we've actually seen the balance on exchanges going down as the price has gone up. That would suggest that people are hoarding the good money. And if you look at that as a percentage of global liquidity, it's very small. It takes a very small percentage of that 97 trillion to actually purchase all the Bitcoin. So when that starts to rush through and acquire it, and I agree with Brandon, there's going to come a point in time where that'll occur, we're going to have to transition from a buy phase to an earn phase. And mining is the easiest and best way to earn your Bitcoin. This picture here is the Milan Cathedral. I know I'm really segueing hard to go to a church picture here, but this has substantial significance for me because this chapel took 569 years to build. Can anybody in this room imagine us starting a project today that would take 600 years to complete? No, but it's Bitcoin. If we're going to be successful with Bitcoin, that's the time frame we have to have. So what does that take to do it? I don't know, but I think we should probably study the institutions that have survived that long to figure it out so we can get there. But what I know is that we're securing something that needs to last for the next several generations if we're truly here to care about the separation of money and state and moving past this Achilles heel that we've had with the centralized money printer. And part of that means we need to own the network and the means of production as the Bitcoin community. So I don't really care how you choose to acquire your Bitcoin through mining, but I care that you do. And, you know, there's hash rate heaters out there that you can now get. There's bid axes, which has been a wonderful movement to see to educate the community. And SAS mining, we've got a different approach. You know, we're tied to the Bitcoin network genetically. It makes us a bit different than the traditional hosting model. So with us, if you wanted to get Bitcoin and larger scale than, say, a bidax or a hash rate heater, you would be able to buy a piece of hardware. We'd service it for you in one of our data centers, and we pass through the costs of hardware and electricity, and we take on the backside a 15% management fee. So we're non-custodial. The Bitcoin's sent from the mining pool. When it's sent, it's split. We get 15%. So that keeps us totally aligned with our clients. It also means that we're aligned with the network too. So that alignment of incentives has propelled a pretty good customer experience, I would argue. And that means that it's your Bitcoin. It's produced outside the system. It's software as a service applied to Bitcoin mining. I thought I had one more slide. No? So this is, I will say, Jeff, this is odd to have a quote from you on here, but you did inspire this business model. So I'd like to end this presentation with this great quote by Jeff. Bitcoin is hope, it's a bridge to the future, and we need to own that bridge. So, you know, plug in a mining rig, turn it on, and stack yourself out of the fiat system. As Brandon said, I'm around if you want to talk to me, but thanks so much. I appreciate you guys all being here.
Building on Bitcoin is not just about writing code and stacking sats.
Let's do it.
This summer, I traveled to Bulgaria
We are here.
Welcome to Bulgaria.
to discover how Bitcoin is being adopted and how it's changing people's lives.
We've been through this with a hyperinflation, 292% inflation, and people forgot it.
For me, all these merchants are heroes. The time felt right. We felt a shift.
Something can be changed.
We have really strong motivation to build on Bitcoin.
The end of the road is global reserve currency. The end of the road is the money for everyone.
Humanity is separated in so many ways, and Bitcoin will unify humanity to be one entity.
Let's discover everything together in Bulgaria.
Kyle, shout out to Kyle. You want to give a quick word on that preview that we just saw here? Bulgaria was a blast.
Yeah, Rainer joined me for the first week of the trip in Bulgaria. Mainly, the hope of the film is to inspire hodlers to become builders. So we come to these Bitcoin conferences, we want to move our time and energy into Bitcoin, not just hold it as an investment. And that's kind of the main mission of the film, and then just traveling around Bulgaria, meeting the different builders there. That's kind of the premise. I'm a couple months away from releasing it, working hard on the editing. So thank you guys so much for being here and supporting everything. Yeah. Thank you, man.
Yeah, that was awesome. Up next, we got Francisco from Sudamerica Hub.
Thank you.
Hello everyone, nice to meet you. My name is Francisco Litway, and today I'll be telling you how you can live free and prosper as a Bitcoiner with flag theory. So I'm a Brazilian Austrian dual national. I have 3 different residencies, companies in multiple jurisdictions, and bank accounts in probably 10 different countries. My job is to help you do the same thing. So basically, my work would be as an internationalization consultant, where we help people from over 50 different countries, over 1,000 clients by now, to internationalize their lives. And while the title officially would be internationalization consultant, one of my clients told me that I really liked was freedom merchant. And it gets one thinking, right? Helping people to move to different countries and, get their tax planning going. What really is freedom? Because that's something that I found out depends on who answers. Because often when you get asked, what's a free country? What's a country that I can, live freely? You see this map here from the Heritage Foundation. That's the Index of Economic Freedom. And, there is some correlation there with the countries that are on the green, with countries that you might want to live, and the countries in deep red, with countries that you might not want to live, right? But then, what about freedom to travel, right? When you look, for example, at the map during the COVID times, and this was only like a snapshot of one of the times, where countries like Nicaragua or Mexico were some of the freest in the world, whereas supposedly free Western countries like Australia were one of the most authoritarian. What about the freedom to use Bitcoin? There are some countries where it's actually a crime if you want to use Bitcoin in any form or accept it. In others, it's regulated. In others, it's in a bit of a limbo. You don't know. So here you also see that there's some correlation, but not fully. And lastly, but not less important, the freedom from taxes. So here are the tax systems of the world, right? Dark blue are the countries where you pay tax on your worldwide income. Light blue are the ones where you pay tax only on local income, so territorial taxation. Green, countries with no income tax. And purple, countries that have some kind of citizenship-based taxation, where you get taxed maybe even if you don't live in that country if you're a citizen. And here is where flag theory comes in. So while the name is flag theory, it's actually a very practical concept that is basically that every aspect of your life that is relevant to you is a flag. Usually when we are born, grow up, we have all our flags in one country: our citizenship, our residency, our banking, our company, etc. The goal of flag theory is to plant these flags around the globe so that you can at the same time get the benefits that other countries may offer in comparison to your home country, while at the same time diversifying yourself, making sure that no one country controls every aspect of your life, right? So you're basically going where you're treated best for that particular aspect, and you no longer depend on a single country to provide everything for you. So this involves global diversification, which can be harder or easier to achieve depending on what flag we're talking about. So for example, many of you here must have some of these, crypto, Bitcoin debit cards, like these bank accounts that you can open in 24 hours for free. While, for example, getting a citizenship is often something that will take, years of your life or, six-figure investments. So this depends really on what flag we're talking about. And it's important to understand that the choice of these flags will always be interdependent. So the residency that you have will affect where you can open your company or where you're going to get access to banking. Or your citizenship may also restrict, for example, some of these other options. So there's no option that's going to fit all of you here because you're from different countries and have different setups, but really depends on what you already have for what you want to have later. So what are some possible flags? Here there's a list of some of the main ones. There are potentially infinite flags. Whatever you can find in your life that could be internationalized could be a flag. So even your servers or where you host your domain or whatever. But normally the main ones that we talk about that will have the most impact for your freedom to travel, for your geographic, for your financial, for your tax freedom will be your citizenship, your residency, your company headquarters, and your banking. And then number 5, your investments, and that's where also Bitcoin fits in as a flag. In terms of how to choose where to plant these flags, there's a few things you should keep in mind. First of all, subjective preference, right? There's no place that will fit for every single person. Some people prefer cold, some people prefer warm, some people prefer proximity to their home country, some people want to be as far away as possible. So you don't know, right? There's no country that will fit the bill for every single individual. This is all based on your personal preferences. That said, don't reject a country just out of prejudice, just because of what you've heard maybe, because usually a country's reputation takes longer to change than the reality on the ground, right? Even, for example, a place like Colombia, that is often still very smeared, and you say, oh, I'm living in Medellin, and some people back home get scared, right? Oh my God, what you're doing in Colombia? So there's that. You should always have a plan B and a plan C, at least. Have at least something in mind that you could do besides what you already are doing. And don't focus just on current trends, where the country is right now, but also in the direction that it is going. So for example, a place like El Salvador is probably still, much poorer than a lot of the countries where you guys come from, but where is the direction that it's going, right? Oh, it's going in a positive growth direction, so that's what we're looking for. Within the context of flag theory, you have the possibility of including digital nomadism, which is the idea of basically living in between countries, right? Not having a single fixed base that allows you to also escape some of the tax disadvantages that the world offers. Because most countries will tax you if you have your center of life there or if you spend over 183 days. So if you would have multiple countries where you spend under 183 days and don't have your center of life there, then you could potentially spend, let's say, 4 or 5 months of the year in a high-tax country like Spain, like some of the Latin American countries like Argentina, and not necessarily have to pay tax there, as long as you're willing to switch between at least 2 countries and a bit every year. And of course, you have the income to support yourself remotely. So if you currently have a high-tax residence like Canada, like Belgium, like some place like this, what can you do? Usually this will involve 4 different steps. Number 1 is preparations, which is really getting ready to change your life, to actually exit the place you are, get out of the lease, etc. Then the real departure, which is physically leaving and cutting the ties that have to be cut to do the exit. Number 3, doing the tax exit, which in many countries will have to be a declaration, whereas in others like Colombia, simply just don't spend more time here and that's it. And then number 4, you actually are no longer a tax resident. Congratulations. Keep in mind, in some countries, number 2 or 3 are reversed. Like if you're from Germany or Austria, you're going to have to do your Abmeldung before you actually are living abroad. So this can be dependent on where you're from. This is the most packed slide of this presentation. I want to give an example of what is possible with flag theory, right? I'm a Bitcoiner, I don't want to pay tax on my Bitcoin capital gains, so where could I possibly go? Here are 7 different categories of countries where you could live without tax on your Bitcoin. So, for example, there are the countries that don't tax private gains at all for Bitcoin or for stocks or for whatever else, like Malta or Switzerland. There are countries that don't pay tax on the gains between crypto, so like if you convert to USDT or USDC, that's not going to be considered a capital gain. For example, like Croatia, like Colombia. There are countries that don't tax gain after a period of retention, so if you hodl for 1-2 years, like in Croatia or Germany, you're exempt. And some countries that don't tax gains at all, even for a corporate level. There's also on the income side, even if you gain, for example, income from mining or something like that, there's the countries that don't tax foreign income, there's those that don't tax foreign income that remains abroad, and those that just don't tax income at all, right? So then you have many Latin American countries here, as you can see, Paraguay, Panama, Uruguay, Costa Rica, DR, etc. So many options to choose from. In the Americas, I'm going to go very quickly over the slide, but you can see on green the countries that don't tax foreign income at all, so you can have a zero tax setup. Countries in blue are those that have some special regimes or exemptions for, maybe 6 years, like the case of Chile, where you could live tax-free or low tax for a while. And then orange are the ones where you're always going to have some tax to really deal with, and you're not going to be on the single digits usually. If you're planning on being a person that goes between countries, then here are a few of the top nomad tax residencies in Latin America. The first 3 are countries that don't tax foreign income and have very low presence requirements, so you can have the tax certificate, the tax residency, tax ID, everything you need for your KYC for banking without actually having to live there, so having access to banking while you're a nomad. And there's, of course, also Colombia, if you want to live here, that is not tax-free, but still has some tax advantages if you use international concepts that we can discuss later in the Q&A. But Francisco, I don't actually want to move anywhere. I'm actually quite happy where I am. What can I do? Well, there's always something that can be done. There's always a little bit of a diversification that every person can implement in their lives. You could have one of those compliance residents, like a backup residency, that you don't have to live in the country to already keep it active. There's the option of opening a foreign company, maybe for your investments or for your international business, like a Panama entity, like a US entity. Also, banking is something that you can set up internationally without having to move abroad. And of course, citizenships, if you have maybe a European great-grandfather or grandfather, you could get something like a European citizenship by descent. Maybe you're married to someone of another nationality. Maybe you do birth tourism and give birth or marry here in Latin America. That also can lead to a faster citizenship. So all things you can do without having to move. Shortly before we close, a few examples of setups that are possible. So myself, I already mentioned. A nomadic programmer, someone that works remotely, could be originally from Australia, let's say, becomes a tax resident in Panama, actually cuts the ties with Australia, uses a UK LLP entity that allows him to do international invoicing tax-free with the right setup, and also pay zero taxes while enjoying Latin America, living some time in Colombia. Maybe you have a couple from Colombia that actually wants to get a European citizenship, do the other way around. So in that case, they could go move to Spain, where you get citizenship as a Latino with just 2 years of residence. So that's the fastest European citizenship possible. And then once they are Spanish citizens, then they go move to Prague, Czech Republic, where there's a big Bitcoin community, and they like the lifestyle there, cheap beers after all. Or let's say you have a businessman with family in the UK and he's not going to necessarily move, then he can do what we mentioned in the other slide and start diversifying without moving. So he can get a citizenship by investment in the Pacific, in Vanuatu, where you can get it with a Bitcoin donation. He gets a property in Greece that gives him a golden visa, and he opens a holding company in Nevis, which is one of the safest places for asset protection in the world. So he diversifies his life situation even before moving. So these were just a couple examples to show you that it's not hard. It's not something that's just for millionaires. It's something that everybody can implement in their lives to already reap some of the benefits of diversification. And if you are interested, then you can also scan this QR code that our team will reach out to you. We'll make a first evaluation to see how we could work together, if there is anything that could be implemented at your case. And you can find more content on residencies, citizenships, banking, and companies abroad at our social medias or directly at our WhatsApp. We're going to have also a Q&A session at the VIP dinner, the VIP lunch. So everybody is welcome to join, or you can just talk to me afterwards. My name is Francisco Litvai, and thank you very much for listening.
Together so that we could sit on them just a little bit further up front. Yeah, where do you want? We just angle them kind of facing each other. I'm going to move this back. All right, buenos dias. What is going on, Colombia? My name is Frank Corva. Super excited to sit down with this gentleman next to me here, Mike Peterson, who has, in my mind, been one of the main people responsible for setting off this global movement of Bitcoin circular economies that we're seeing. So, in the presence of a legend, ladies and gentlemen, a round of applause for Mike here, if you don't mind, to start things off. Yeah. I cover the Bitcoin circular economy. I would call it a movement. We're seeing it spring up, especially across Latin America, Africa, places in Southeast Asia, but also we're seeing it even in Washington, D.C., a little bit in New York even. And so it's exciting to see Bitcoin starting to be used more as money, but seeing Bitcoin, I think, more as a catalyst, right? People changing in these communities as a result of adopting Bitcoin. So that's kind of high level. If we could start there, what has changed in Bitcoin Beach, in El Zonte, El Salvador, and then what are you seeing globally with a lot of the projects that you're paying attention to / helping, providing some funding for?
Yeah, so I'm assuming that some of you here know the history of Bitcoin Beach, but I'll give a kind of a brief recap of what we've seen since we started the project in 2019. In 2019, El Salvador was still one of the most dangerous countries in the world. In fact, for the decade prior to that, there was a battle between Honduras and El Salvador every year for who was going to have the highest murder rate every year. Not exactly the contest that you want to win. And so we were in a small community of El Zonte. It's on the coast of El Salvador. Very, very beautiful, a tourist community, but also, like most of El Salvador, it was controlled by the gangs. MS-13 was the gang that controlled our community. And because of that, we saw most of the young people, their kind of paths were either to try to go to the U.S. illegally or to join the gang. And that was kind of what we kept seeing. And so we set out to really try to empower the youth, to encourage them to continue in school, to continue with their education, and to really give them some hope that they could build a future in El Salvador, because most people there just felt that El Salvador was going to continue to get worse and worse. And so as part of this project, we were approached by somebody who said, hey, we want to support what you guys are doing, and we want to give a donation in Bitcoin to be used in various ways in the community, but the stipulation is you can't just convert this Bitcoin to fiat. The donor's belief was that it was actually the using of Bitcoin that would change the community, that would change the young people. And as most of you as Bitcoiners, I think can attest, Bitcoin does, there's a saying that you don't change Bitcoin, it changes you. And so this was the vision. And myself as a Bitcoiner at that time, I was very excited about the possibility of doing this. And so we embarked on this in 2019, actually just prior to COVID, and started paying young people in sats to clean the local beaches, to clean the rivers. We were giving them stipends if they got good grades to stay in school. And we really started to see this transformation in the young people in this community, that they, for the first time, started to believe that there was a future, and they started saving. One thing that you often hear in poor countries is that there's no way to accumulate capital because the wages are so low that it's just impossible to save. And it does appear that way. I was always really impressed to see the way that people in El Salvador made it through the end of the month with the meager wages that they had. And so it made sense when they would say that they couldn't save. But what we saw was when people convert to a Bitcoin standard, when they start earning in Bitcoin, when they start living off of Bitcoin, they really question all of their purchases. And they really actually start finding ways to cut corners and to save. And so we were kind of shocked. All of a sudden, these young people that were earning very meager wages, they were starting to accumulate a decent amount of Bitcoin. And, it helped that the Bitcoin was going up in fiat terms at that time, but even just the measured in sats, they were accumulating, and they were starting to invest in their own education. They were starting small businesses. And so we saw how changing out fiat for Bitcoin really transforms how people view their own potential. And that low time preference that we talk about, it's not just related to Bitcoin and the financial side of it, but it's also about the life skills, them investing in their own education, them thinking long term about their community and wanting to invest in their community. And so we saw El Zonte start to change, and the government of El Salvador took notice of that. They wound up, adopting Bitcoin as legal tender, and it's spread throughout El Salvador now. It's, become a hub for Bitcoiners throughout the world. A lot of Bitcoiners have moved there. That has become their plan B or their plan A now. And it's one of the only places in the world where you can truly live on a Bitcoin standard. Of course, that doesn't mean that everybody accepts Bitcoin, and the dollar still is definitely more widely used than Bitcoin. But it is one of the only places in the world where you can truly live on a Bitcoin standard, and I know dozens of people that are doing that. But then also lots of the local people who are moving in that direction, that initially when they were earning Bitcoin or being paid in Bitcoin, they would quickly convert to fiat. But over time, as they watched the direction that Bitcoin was going versus fiat, they realized that they're better off staying in Bitcoin. And so we've seen that kind of slow, gradual transformation. And as Frank referenced, this hasn't just stayed in El Salvador. There was kind of the eyes of the world watching as El Salvador embarked on this, and people coming to visit, people curious, like, okay, is change really happening? And so from that, we've seen these Bitcoin circular economies spring up around the world. I mean, really on every continent, I guess, except for Antarctica, we have Bitcoin circular economies now that are really growing. And the remarkable thing is to see how they have pushed the overall Bitcoin adoption forward. I'll give you one example is Lightning adoption. Lightning adoption was really slow until El Salvador declared Bitcoin as legal tender, and all of these stores needed a fast way to be able to accept payments. And so because of that, a lot of people say, well, Lightning's not ready. Well, because of all the entrepreneurial minds in the Bitcoin space, these tools and new wallets and everything were developed to actually make it ready. And so we see in El Salvador, the majority of people do their transactions on Lightning. Some people, that just use Bitcoin on a daily basis, they don't even really realize the distinction. They just see a Bitcoin transaction as a Lightning transaction because that's the majority of what they do. And so we've seen that the way that wallets are developed, because of circular economies, people, the wallet developers, instead of putting in them what they think, which a lot of times if you're sitting in an office somewhere and you have access to, electricity 24/7, you have your bank accounts, you have all these things, what you think a wallet needs is going to be different from somebody who's living in an environment where electricity and internet is intermittent, where oftentimes they have challenge reading their screens in harsh sunlight. And so the fact that we have developers come in to these circular economies and develop the tools for the kind of the poorest of the poor and what they need, we've seen Bitcoin become more accessible to the world because of that. So sorry, I kind of rambled on for a lot there, but yeah.
I enjoyed all of that. I'm sure everybody did too. One of the things that I think is important to note that Bitcoin you don't just sprinkle Bitcoin on things and then everything is fixed. It takes human beings on the ground who are trusted, members of the community like yourself, like Roman, Chimbera, who are two of the main people involved in building Bitcoin Beach and what it's become. And then there was also, I think, when El Salvador when Bukele did make Bitcoin legal tender, everybody got a Chivo wallet, but a lot of people sold it. They associated Bitcoin with the government, and not necessarily just Bukele, but just the government in general. And at that point, that's almost like when the work begins. That's when you really have to educate people. And I believe a lot of that happened while Bitcoin was maybe at a higher price point priced in fiat. We saw a bear market. It's not only difficult on a cognitive level to educate people about Bitcoin, but on an emotional level, it's almost like you need to be there with them, show up every day, continue to be trusted, develop that trust with them. Can you speak a little bit to that challenge? Because I think sometimes that gets overlooked and not highlighted enough.
Yeah, we always tell people if you want to start a Bitcoin circular economy, really your end goal needs to be to see the lives in the community improved, not Bitcoin adoption just for Bitcoin adoption's sake. A lot of people think that you can kind of just parachute in and sprinkle some Bitcoin around and kind of evangelize people on Bitcoin and then leave. That's not the way that it really happens. Money is something that's very personal to people, and it's something that takes years for them to change the way that they look at it. And I always encourage people to think about your own Bitcoin journey. Did you just all of a sudden hear about Bitcoin for the first time and think, oh, this is great, I'm going to move all of my assets into Bitcoin? Probably most of you, like me, thought, this sounds like a Ponzi scheme. Like, this is crazy. What do you mean? You can't see it, you can't touch it. And it takes a while for you to understand why Bitcoin is the realest money. And so if we have all gone through this journey that takes several years, we should, of course, expect that everybody else, in communities, they're going to go through that similar journey. And for a lot of them, too, they don't have maybe the freedom with their time or the maybe excess resources that some of us may have, where we can actually spend our days listening to podcasts, and we can dive down the rabbit hole, and we can afford to put capital at risk. And so their adoption is maybe going to take more time. And so what we encourage people is you need to be part of that community. If you're not already part of that community, you need to find trusted leaders in that community that are going to partner with you, that they're going to be the ones on the ground. They're going to be the ones getting the phone call when Bitcoin dumps 10% overnight and these people think that you've rug pulled them. They're going to be the ones that kind of, help people understand that how their security has to increase as their number of sats increase. We don't want to overwhelm people from the onset and tell them that they need to get a hardware wallet and they need to have multi-sig and all these things. No, oftentimes the best way to onboard somebody is with a simple custodial Lightning wallet. And then we educate them of the importance of self-custody as they start to acquire sats, as they start to go down the rabbit hole themselves and start to self-educate. Then we move them to a hardware wallet as the amount of funds that they've accumulated warrants that. If they have very little Bitcoin, it probably doesn't make sense for them to spend all their sats to buy a hardware wallet and be left with no Bitcoin. And so it's kind of walking with them and seeing their needs. And in every community, there's going to be a different need. In some communities, it'll be, hey, this is an easy way for them to receive remittances from family members that are working overseas, and this allows them to bypass the banks and the fees and the hassle of Western Union, and it really brings freedom in that way. For others, it's the first time that they can actually make purchases online. We've seen the adoption a lot of times happens in young people, because for the first time in their video games that they're playing, they can go in and buy the skins or the sword or whatever they want. Not that I think that's the best way to spend Bitcoin, but it is a lot of times the best way to introduce the freedom and kind of the leveling of the playing field that Bitcoin brings. And so, yeah, we always advise people, you need to be in the community, and it needs to be a long-term commitment.
Amazing. Speaking of commitment, a lot of these communities, even Bitcoin Beach itself, you got a grant from an anonymous donor, gave you some Bitcoin, and I know you, as well as other organizations like HRF, give grants to some of these Bitcoin circular economy startups. Are you seeing over a certain amount of time, is there a time frame where these communities start to feel a little bit more sustainable, where they're not looking for help from outside organizations, where there's just a group of people spending Bitcoin amongst themselves and that sort of sustaining and growing?
Yeah, the key to sustainability is not just so much the how much time it's going to take, but what has been the strategy of how you're going to bring Bitcoin in from the outside. Because you need to get Bitcoin into a community in order for it to start to circulate, but it also has to continue to come in because there's always going to be some Bitcoin that leaks out. And so you need to find a way. In El Salvador, in El Zonte specifically, we felt like tourism would be the best way to bring that. We saw that, hey, if we can encourage Bitcoin tourists from around the world to come in and spend Bitcoin, it actually makes life so much easier for them. They don't have to stop and try to exchange, currency to be able to spend there. They can just come with their Bitcoin wallet. They can spend freely. We knew that would be a way that we'd see continued injection. But then even further, we felt like, hey, if we can get people to see El Salvador as their plan B or their plan A, like they actually buy a home there, maybe visit for a few months, a year to start, and eventually decide to move there. And if these people are living on a Bitcoin standard, they're going to be injecting quite a bit of Bitcoin into the local community. And so we'll see that amount that's circulating locally continue to improve. Now, we work with a lot of different projects that don't have that option. Some of them are in places that you're never going to get tourists to come. There are places that quite frankly don't have a lot of natural beauty. There's a lot of challenges in those communities, and so probably tourism is not going to be the answer for them. And so we're not going to push that on them. For them, we encourage, hey, is there a way to train up the young people with skills that they can stay rooted in their community, stay part of this community, but work for companies overseas where they can be paid in Bitcoin? And so is this something that they can do where they're being paid in Bitcoin every month, and then they're going to turn around and inject that and spend it in the local community? So in each community, it's going to be something different. Sometimes it's businesses that they can capitalize on, that they can be Bitcoin-based businesses where they're selling products and receiving Bitcoin. A lot of times it's them, encouraging their locals to work in the same way that digital nomads do, and to have that geo arbitrage where they're living in a community where the cost of living is still low, but they're earning in Bitcoin and earning, the wages of actually a foreign country versus the local. And so in each situation, it's going to be different on how that kind of happens to make it sustainable. But I do think we need to be realistic that oftentimes to get this ball rolling, to get the network effect to kind of kick in, it may take several years. I think what happened in El Zonte was, on the fast side of how quickly you can see that happen. In El Zonte now, it is self-sustaining. But I think in a lot of these other places, they probably will need a little longer, time frame to ramp things up.
100%. I was going to ask a little bit more. You brought it up there, but earning in Bitcoin, not only from working now for maybe international companies, we see a lot of that. A program called Bitcoin Dada. A lot of the women who go through this program, it's a program for African women to learn about Bitcoin. A lot of them go on to then work for Bitcoin companies. And for them, I think earning in sats, it makes you think a little bit about Bitcoin less in fiat terms and more just this is the money that I earn. And I think in something like Bitcoin Akazi in South Africa, I think they have 14 members of the nonprofit that they're associated with, that the circular economy is associated with, taking their salary in Bitcoin. Do you really feel like that's sort of the way? Do people need to start earning in it? And does that start to solidify not just the circular economy dynamic, but people's psychology around Bitcoin?
Yeah, I think once you start earning in Bitcoin, it really transforms the way you look at everything. It transforms how you value your time, and you actually see that you're not valuing it in the current fiat value. You're valuing it in what you think Bitcoin is going to be worth someday. And so I think it's very important when you can to be earning in Bitcoin. But the other thing that we tend to struggle with is seeing Bitcoiners, even ones that come to El Zonte, they come to Bitcoin Beach, and then they want to spend in fiat. And I'm like, come on, you have this opportunity. This is one of the places in the world where you can freely spend your Bitcoin. Why wouldn't you just convert your fiat? And what I always tell people is when you move to living on a Bitcoin standard, you will wind up with more Bitcoin because you will be more careful with how you spend. Like all the fiat that you're holding, you're sacrificing the ability to hold more Bitcoin. Like there is an opportunity cost to holding fiat. And so what we need is to see Bitcoiners out there leading the way. If you believe Bitcoin is the money of the future, if you believe that it promotes freedom and self-sovereignty, you should be the one using it and promoting it and not promoting the system that you think is corrupt.
Appreciate that. I want to also touch on maybe biggest challenges. So when it comes to biggest challenge, and then also maybe not only how you've addressed them in El Zonte, but how you're learning from other communities, how they're addressing those challenges. So generally speaking, what is the hardest part about getting a circular economy started? And then what are some of the notable hurdles that people often have to hop over?
the biggest challenge of getting circular economy started is the trust issue, and to seeing that network effect kick in. And so what I tell people time and time again is whatever your plan is for this circular economy, shrink it down to 10% of that size. If you think that you're going to, hit this city, instead hit this neighborhood. Even within that neighborhood, instead of focusing, if it's a 1 mile street that that has a bunch of businesses, focus on where the greatest economic hub of that is, because I would much rather see 3 businesses accepting Bitcoin that are in the same sight line of each other than to see 100 businesses scattered across a big city. Because if you just have individual businesses that are scattered, you don't have that network effect kick in. You most of the time, what will happen over time is they'll stop accepting it because nobody's coming to spend it there. But if you have a hub of businesses that are accepting Bitcoin, Bitcoiners will come there to spend. Even the local people will start to look around and be like, wait, what's happening here? Why do these businesses have more customers now? How can I be a part of it? And once they start accepting Bitcoin, they realize, okay, wow, this gives me an opportunity that I've never had before to save in an asset that's going up in value over time. And so that's one of the biggest challenges is we see people think too big. You need to think small, and then from there, it'll naturally ripple out. We saw that in El Zonte. It was a town of 3,000 people. And even in that, we started in just a small section of town. And once that section caught fire, it just naturally spread. We had businesses then coming to us. How can I accept Bitcoin? How can I be part of it? Then you saw the neighboring towns say, wow, you guys have this huge increase in tourism. You have foreigners that are moving into your community. They're investing in your community. How can we participate in it? We didn't have to try to orange pill them. They came to us asking to be orange pilled. And so that, I think, is my primary advice I'd give to people is start small, realize it's going to take, months, if not years, and kind of be in it for the long haul. And you'll be surprised. At first, it'll feel like, man, we're not really accomplished anything. But then a few years out, you'll be like, wow, this is shocking how much this has spread.
You just used a word that was a part of my next question, which is surprises. You've been on a wild journey. We were talking a little bit more about, your life before this. You went to El Salvador on a surf trip. You end up down there being now at the center of this Bitcoin circular economy movement, having created one of the model for it. I think one of the things that we all need, maybe sometimes feeling like outsiders as Bitcoiners in a world where it's becoming a little less taboo, a little bit more accepted, but we're by no means, mainstream yet. I don't think so, at least. Can you take us a little bit on the journey of what it's been for you? What have been some of the surprises along the way, and what's kept you motivated to continue doing what you are doing?
Yeah, we definitely didn't set out with the goal of having this be a worldwide movement. We just thought we could improve the lives in El Zonte. I did think there was a chance that we could get El Salvador to adopt Bitcoin as legal tender because they had already given up their own currency. So to me, it seemed like the perfect candidate. But that was kind of like a moonshot. You didn't really think it was going to happen. And so, obviously to see that transpire has been motivating. I mean, to see El Salvador, who most people had never heard of, and if they had heard of it before, they viewed it in a negative light, become this kind of like beacon of freedom within the world of, hey, here is a country that has decided to adopt Bitcoin and is kind of leading the world forward. I think that has been something that continues to keep me motivated. But then on the more micro scale, to see the young people who in the past, like you would ask them what their dream was, and they would just look at you confused because for most of them, dreaming was unheard of. You were just trying to survive. And so now to see that they have dreams to go on to university, they're starting businesses, they're doing amazing things in the community. That's the thing that kind of like keeps us going, and even as we're working with these communities all around the world and traveling to conferences and those things, it's the seeing what's happening on the ground that really keeps us motivated. As far as challenges, I think that even in the Bitcoin space, having low time preference is something that a lot of us think that we have, but in reality, we don't. We're impatient. We want everything to happen tomorrow, or today, I should say. And so, you see some criticism of people that come to El Salvador, and they're like, well, they're still using the dollar in a lot of these places, and I thought this was Bitcoin country. And so, just realizing that sometimes people's expectations of how long, changing a whole monetary system, like in the history books, they'll talk about it happening overnight, but when you're actually living through it, oftentimes it feels painfully slow. And so even though we're, I think, maybe 6 years in here, it's amazing to see what's been accomplished in El Salvador, but there's still a long way to go. And so I think that's one of the things, is just to be realistic about how long these things take.
Appreciate it. As a final, maybe something for the audience to carry away if they're thinking about even onboarding some businesses in their community, or maybe even starting a Bitcoin circular economy, just kind of first things to keep in mind as they undertake that process, maybe, or like I said, not necessarily creating the next El Zonte, but even saying I want to get 3 coffee shops in my neighborhood onboarded to Bitcoin. How should they be approaching those stores, those potential people who would be accepting Bitcoin?
I think the first thing is to realize anybody can do it. And anybody who knows me at all knows I'm like one of the least tech savvy people out there, and so it's kind of ironic and funny that I was part of the team that did this in El Salvador. The other thing is just to realize you need to meet these people's needs and figure out what their needs are, not what you want them to do. Like, Bitcoin is the tool, it's not the end goal. And so how can Bitcoin change these people's lives? And that is what I would encourage you to focus on. And like I said, don't be afraid for it to start small, and don't be afraid to try to find other people to come alongside and work in that with you.
I think we're going to leave it there, Mike, unless any other thoughts, anything else you'd like to share?
No, just appreciate you guys allowing us to be here.
Sure, question works, yeah.
Can you give us like a couple of pointers about what to say to them? You are trying to make it, you are making us realize that it's not about Bitcoin every day. If you could give us maybe your experience, a couple of pointers.
Maybe something practically, like exactly what he said to that merchant. Okay.
Yeah, so I think helping them understand the benefits of accepting Bitcoin, that it'll bring in more customers. Obviously, for every business wants to be more attractive to more people, and so for them to understand that, hey, this is a way that people will actually seek you out. That's one thing that we saw in El Salvador. For a lot of businesses, especially small businesses, they don't have what the banks require as far as accepting credit cards and having digital payments. So showing them a way that for the first time they can do digital payments. Say, for example, they're a small hostel and they haven't been able to take advanced reservations in the past from foreign customers because they had no way to receive a deposit. Now there's a way for them to actually receive that. It also opens up for them to be able to make purchases online. They can, buy airline tickets online without having a credit card. So kind of showing them the different value propositions and what it brings to them. And also that they have very little to lose by starting to understand this.
I appreciate it. I do. Let's do one more. I want to make sure we don't cut into the next speaker's time. Yes, one more in the back. Yeah.
What is the POS of choice?
So POS meaning a point of service machine, like a payment machine. Yep.
There's a lot of great tools out there, so I encourage people to see what's going to work best for them. For small stores, a lot of times it's just the phone that's going to be the most practical. In El Salvador, we primarily use the Blink wallet. It was developed as part of our project, and so it worked well there, and it's used in most other circular economies just because it was kind of developed for that. But there's a lot of other great tools and companies there, so I think it's exploring and finding out what works best for the people.
BTC pay server, I feel like, is also seems like a go-to in a lot of places. But there's a lot of cool stuff. A lot of, I think, in Bitcoin, in Praia, Brazil, in that circular economy, they're building their own point.
Yeah,
of
they have
service
the
systems.
Bitcoinized machines that
Bitcoinized
have
machines.
the tap to pay that are really great.
Yep.
And so yeah, that's what's so amazing is to see all the new tools that are constantly coming out.
Yeah, I was gonna say it's kind of it's all sort of happening very, very quickly. So I think you have to almost think regionally a little bit, because especially too, you might need an expert there if the machines aren't working properly. So something to consider. But these were great questions. A round of applause for Mike and all that he's done, please. Thank you, Mike. Appreciate it.
Check, check. All right, that was amazing. We've got another talk coming up here in the main stage, but also wanted to give a heads up for anyone that speaks Spanish. There's a panel in Español in the side stage talking about la historia de Bitcoin. So if you're interested, that's here on the side stage starting in a couple minutes. And then we're going to have our panel here, Living on a Bitcoin Standard, on the main stage starting shortly.
All right, we're going to kick this thing off. Let's go. We got an all-star lineup today. 3 legends in the building and an awesome topic. One of my favorites. Rainier, are we ready to kick this thing off? Yeah, we are. All right. Who here lives on a Bitcoin standard, just in the audience? And you guys? Okay, maybe less than half, some. Who here wants to move towards living on a Bitcoin standard, but maybe isn't quite there? Okay, that's more the boat that I'm in. So I thought a good place to start would just to be kind of orient us on what it actually means to live on a Bitcoin standard, because I think the definition can vary quite a bit. And also just give us a little intro, maybe 30 seconds each, on what you guys are doing specifically building on Bitcoin. In Dallas, let's kick it straight to you.
Yeah, so I created an app called Satoshi, the Bitcoin app, and essentially I think it's a really good onboarding point for people. So anybody can get a self-custodial wallet where you can manage on-chain, Lightning, Liquid, really like the kind of most used versions of Bitcoin. So you can do so for payments, hold it yourself, take care of your assets, and then obviously pay or receive pretty easily with people. And then there's a lot of other things you can, a lot of other things you can learn on the app. Yeah, I think ultimately, Bitcoin is the experience extends to the tool you use and interface with it. And so I'm passionate about just making that funner and easier for people to use.
Neil?
Hi, everybody. My name is Neil Jacobs. So living on a Bitcoin standard for me, as was just mentioned on the prior panel, you don't necessarily have a lot of systems in place at certain businesses yet, right, around the world. So for me, it's having my wealth in Bitcoin and converting, back to fiat when I need to do that. And that's worked well for me over time. I've been paid in Bitcoin. I've paid people in Bitcoin, accept Bitcoin for my businesses. And ever since I started doing that in my life's only gotten better. I've only gotten wealthier. So it seems like a win-win all around.
So saving for you is the main thing. And then Tom?
And
spending and...
Yeah, I mean, as the rails just aren't necessarily aren't there yet. So it's mostly a savings vehicle for me.
I love Bitcoin. It's really saved and changed my life in profound ways. And when you get on the Bitcoin standard, suddenly you just can relax about a lot of things. You can have $1 billion in fiat, and you'll never know if you have enough to the end of your life. You'll never know. They can debase the heck out of it that you may be penniless. But with Bitcoin, you can just have a little bit of Bitcoin and you know you got a roof over your head. And that is a game changer for everything, your nervous system all the way down. It gives you freedom, and what is freedom? It's optionality. You have optionality in life, and that's what true wealth is. When you have the options to live where you want to live with who you want to live how you want to live, that's true wealth, and Bitcoin gives you that.
Yeah, it really is peace of mind, knowing that your time can't be stolen from you anymore by, some people in a room somewhere.
Absolutely. For me, the unlock was realizing 1 Bitcoin equals 1 Bitcoin, right? If you start to, exactly what your point is, the question I ask people is, how much money do you need to retire? And the number is millions of dollars, and no one really knows. Like you said, $1 billion. And with Bitcoin, we had a great talk from Brandon Keys to start the morning today. It's just, it's so scarce, and we're so early to it. So I thought next question I want to ask you guys is, how has living on a Bitcoin standard changed your relationship to time, risk, and maybe even your relationships? Broad question, but just how has that changed?
Yeah, maybe I'll start. I think ultimately, piggybacking on what these guys said, Bitcoin brings certainty to your life in a very uncertain world. And your value that you hold, that you spend your energy to work, right, really is like, if you put it in the right place, it's really like the foundation, right? And everything else is built upon that. So if you have your money and your value sitting somewhere where you don't know what's going on, you have anxiety, everything else is sort of a derivative for that, down from that, right? Because how you do one thing is how you do everything. And so I think for me personally, like when I made the shift, which has been many years now, everything else has a different effect, right? Your relationships, you approach those in the right way. You want those to be long lasting and make sense. You want the food you eat to be high quality and something that's going to serve you and give you more energy to do more in the world. And so I think, again, like how you store your money and your energy, if you choose Bitcoin, everything follows suit from that in a very positive way for your life because you have a solid foundation at which is your starting point.
Would you mind just repeating the question really quick?
Just how has it changed your relationship with time and risk, and even your relationships, I think, is another interesting topic, because if you're living on a Bitcoin standard but your loved ones are not, there can be some tension there as well.
Yeah, my relationship with time, I plan more for the future. When it comes to just Bitcoin's purchasing power, volatility in the short term, it makes me think 4 years out, makes me think about not wanting to have to eat into my Bitcoin, knowing that it's going to be worth so much more in the future. Obviously, in fiat systems, you're encouraged to spend because if you don't spend it or put it in some asset that involves risk, that you're going to lose it over time, right? The purchasing power. So it definitely reframes the way you think about things. In terms of my relationships, it's helped me find amazing relationships with people that share values. It also makes it harder in certain ways with certain people who are still stuck inside the fiat matrix, this old way of thinking. They look at us as if we're part of some sort of cult, but really they're the ones that were born into it, right? So it's not easy all the time. But you work through it and you just keep moving.
That's a great answer.
For me, it's interesting. I'm a single man without children, and what matters most to me is legacy. But they don't have any natural heirs. So what do I have to do in this world? I have to do something with my own life to make it worth it, to leave a legacy that endures. And my timeline's not my lifetime. It's at least 200 years. And so in terms of risk, I take much more risk in my life because Bitcoin has my back. And you can do incredible things in this world, and you just find those people to do it with. You find those places to do it, and you can help make humanity a better place. And at the end of your life, you look back at it, what do you really care about? How did I live it? Did I do it with integrity? Did it matter?
Very well said. Someone asked me what the hardest part of the Bitcoin journey was on a podcast a couple weeks ago, and I got stumped. I was like, it's been so fantastic, I can't think of anything. Then I realized what you just said, which is the challenge that we have with our loved ones. And so how have you guys approached trying to educate the people that you love, and maybe give us some pointers on how to approach those things?
That's a tough question, right? I think, you know, like you always have to meet people where they're at. I think putting Bitcoin in their hands, having them send it, having them receive it, walking through, explaining the chain, going on mempool, showing them like really what's going on first to give like a base level knowledge is really important. And then time really just has to work, right? I think like for all of us, right, most people don't just jump in with everything that they have. It's this gradual thing until you figure it out. The same thing's going to be true for your loved ones, but I mean, ultimately, you need to, you know, explain the benefits, bring the same passion when you're helping to try to bring them up to where you're at. And it's just a gradual process. But, you know, obviously who you pick as your partner in your life and the loved ones in your life are really the most important foundational relationships you have. So make a good choice first, right? And then everything's, I think, a little bit easier after that.
Yeah, you stole the line right out of my head. Meet people where they are. You know, I really never try to force Bitcoin down anyone's throat. You know, years ago, 5, 6 years ago, maybe Bitcoin in dollar terms was like under $10,000, and people would come up to me and say, how much Bitcoin should I have? And that's always like a weird question to answer. But I would say get one for every member of your family. And in the US, that was kind of like still reasonable. Obviously, other places around the world, like $10,000 is a lot of money. So for me personally, you know, what I did for people close to me is I just was like, okay, they're not going to do this. I'm just going to work harder and stack harder for the people I care about and the people I love. You know, I think I heard American Hodl say this once, like trying to, you know, bring Bitcoin to someone's life is saying, I love you. And that's, you know, that's what I tried to do when it came to, you know, people don't want to listen. I'm just going to stack more. I'm going to work harder to set the people up around me. And nowadays, I kind of have a different answer for people when they ask me how much, you know, what percent of my net worth should I put into Bitcoin? And usually, you know, it could be a little harsh, but I say none, because if you have to ask the question, you're not really ready yet to hold something like Bitcoin. You know, it kind of depends on my audience a little bit. But yeah, I would just say it's a form of saying I care about someone at the very least, and you know, don't force anything onto someone. They'll reject it more if, you know, let them come to you, find the pain points in their life. Never really lead with Bitcoin. You know, when I'm explaining Bitcoin, I never really mention Bitcoin first. You talk about, you know, inflation and money before you even get there. You get there, so.
I've definitely fire hosed people, and I've been very forceful early in my career, and you're right, Neil, this does not work. Thank you. Yeah. So the more you get down the path, the more chill you can be about it. And if you're trying to convince your family members, it doesn't really work. It just doesn't. Here's my suggestion. Here's what worked for me. I mean, 3 years with the close friends that I live with and my dearest of friends, he just said, Tom, why are you so focused on money? Don't you care about goodness in the world? You know, it's like, golly, you're just like money focused. And it's like, no, you just don't understand. What actually finally worked was taking your friends to Bitcoin events, a local meetup. The big deal was I took my friend to Pacific Bitcoin. And when he sat down, the first tent he went into, he listened to, Lynn Alden. He says, holy mackerel. I think that's the smartest person in this room. I think you're probably right. And then he heard Eric Casey and says, that's my soul brother. He's like, that man knows what he's talking about. And so let somebody else do the work for you. That's my recommendation. Be really cool about it. Be chill. And to the point of how much should you have, you can't get it until you actually understand it. So that's the point. The difference between having a little bit and a lot is the more you understand, the more you know you need it. So that's it. It's all education for yourself.
You know, it's a good point. You know, money has been kind of turned into this negative thing in society. You know, money's the root of all evil. Like you're sinning because you want more money, but money helps free up our time. It helps us help people. It's a tool. It's just a tool, and that could be used for good and bad things. And I think, you know, Bitcoin flips that on its head, flips the money is the root of all evil on its head, and it's no, money is positive and it empowers people. And, you know, that's what I'm here for at this point.
Okay, so I got a little bit of a spicy question here. Curious what you guys think about this. Is buying a Bitcoin ETF or a Bitcoin treasury company in any way the same thing as owning Bitcoin in self-custody?
It's not the same, right? And I also don't think a treasury company is the same as Bitcoin is an ETF. I think a lot of Bitcoiners, some of us, right, who've been here longer, right, they almost like reject the idea of buying it in any other form other than you buy it, you hold it yourself, and obviously that's where you want to get to. But that's not the best scenario for all people at all levels that they're at. It is certainly better for my aunt to own some of the Bitcoin ETF than to own nothing at all. It would be better for her to get to a point where she can hold in self-custody, absolutely. But I think that there are certain products and certain stages for people where they're at. Not everyone's going to follow that progression to the promised land like most of us are at, and that's okay. But I think it serves a necessary purpose, despite the fact that some of the people launching it are people that we're not big fans of, who've been some of the worst actors in the existing system. Those two things can sort of live at the same point, you know, at the same time, but they're not the same thing, certainly.
Yeah, the simple answer is no, they're not. You're getting exposure to the price of Bitcoin, so you're betting, you know, you're saying, okay, I think the price is Bitcoin's going to go up, but I don't want the benefits that holding Bitcoin will bring to me, right? There's a lot of great marketing terms going around. You hear this thing like amplified Bitcoin. The only amplified Bitcoin I know is holding it in self-custody, because you amplify, you know, your freedom, your sovereignty, being able to, you know, leave at a moment's notice if your government, you know, loses their mind, which is happening more and more around the world. So the answer is no. You know, I'm not saying you shouldn't own a Bitcoin ETF. I have retirement accounts where I do hold Bitcoin ETFs myself, but that's not Bitcoin. That's exposure to the price of Bitcoin. And yeah, it's been a really weird last 2 years since the Bitcoin ETFs came out. I feel like we've had this bifurcation in the Bitcoin world of this financialization of Bitcoin, and the people who are kind of still on the same mission of sovereignty and freedom. And you know, they overlap in certain instances. But ultimately, Bitcoin is an open protocol. It's permissionless. People are free to do what they want to do. And you know, if you don't like the treasury companies or ETFs, don't spend your time on them. Focus your energy on things you care about, and you know, the chips will fall where they may.
This isn't a spicy question. This is a religious question, obviously. So this is like very dangerous. So as a Bitcoin maxi, I guess some would disagree that I'm Bitcoin maxi. I consider myself a Bitcoin maxi. And yes, holding Bitcoin in cold storage is the best thing you can do for yourself and your family. Is that how we're going to get to a Bitcoin world, though? It's not. If we're going to really take this world, we need to take, well, it's the ETFs. Can they get rug pulled? Oh, yeah. That whole thing can come crashing down, so proceed with caution. But also, are we changing the world to that? Are people's 401ks going into them? Great. We're moving towards a Bitcoin standard that way. The Bitcoin treasury companies, do we not want the entire equities market to be valued in Bitcoin? How are we going to do that without Bitcoin treasury companies? That's what's happening. If Bitcoin's going to take over the entire stock market, all that stuff, it's got to be in Bitcoin. How are you going to do that with treasury companies? Should you hold it? Not necessarily, but that's going to happen. Is strategy going to be the most valuable company for the next 100 years? Yep. I don't see how anybody can catch them. So if you want to be part of that, be part of that. It's up to you how you spend your risk. But yeah, go ahead, Dallas.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I mean, I think if you're building, you know, kind of the food pyramid of Bitcoin, right? The ability to hold it yourself and hold that money securely where no one can take it from you, no one can stop your payment, no one can stop you receiving, that is the most important part. Don't get that twisted at all. Nope. Because without that, Bitcoin isn't valuable. Secondarily, what's a derivative of that is the purchasing power. Obviously, we view that as like the USD price or the Colombian price of a Bitcoin. That really matters a lot also, right? And so having price exposure to it is way better than not having price exposure to it. And the current, you know, purchasing power Bitcoin has is immensely important. Like for everyone in this room, like we're all still going to love each other and support each other. But if the purchasing power of Bitcoin was 100th of what it is tomorrow that it is right now, that'd be really bad. So we need to get to a point where Bitcoin's a bigger asset that has more purchasing power, because it is going to continue to eat the world, and that's where you sort of can leave fiat behind. But it has to get a whole lot bigger for everyone to get there. And there's different ways people are going to get there, and we should be guiding people towards the best ways, but some people have to work that path differently than the rest of us.
Yeah, and just back to Bitcoin treasuries, I haven't really talked about them that much. Yeah, should a company buy Bitcoin? Sure. I think where a lot of the frustration has come among many in the Bitcoin community is that certain Bitcoiners who came and promoted this mission of freedom and sovereignty have now used their fame and credibility to say, hey, invest in this equity, right? And I think that's what people have the most angst about. It's not that companies shouldn't buy Bitcoin. I've never really heard any Bitcoiner, the most Bitcoin maximalist, toxic Bitcoiner, ever say a company shouldn't own Bitcoin. In fact, that would be antithetical to Bitcoin, right? Because it's freedom technology. So I don't think it's anyone saying the company shouldn't own Bitcoin. It's about what's happening and the mechanics around how they've tried to promote these companies.
Yeah, and just one last point to Neil's point. It's like most of these treasury companies, they don't have a real business. Their business is sort of copying MicroStrategy and then raising some debt, buying Bitcoin, and then trying to leverage the markets. And most of them are not going to do that anywhere near at the level of execution that MicroStrategy is doing it, because they have scale and a whole bunch of other reasons. And so to Neil's point, it's like if actual companies with actual revenue want to actually buy Bitcoin, that's a great thing. But if you're buying kind of these ghost companies that are purely trying to financialize their way into a bigger bag, there's a lot of risk associated with that, and most people are not going to do that well at all. And so you're taking way more risk to try to get, enhanced Bitcoin exposure, enhanced with air quotes. And you probably you certainly would have been better off just having some yourself that you have control over.
Yeah, and also just the marketing and the labeling, Bitcoin treasury company. What does that mean? Does it just mean you hold Bitcoin on your balance sheet? Or then there's already been thousands and thousands of companies that have existed, private companies.
Probably 4 on the stage right now.
Right, exactly. There's companies that have existed before public companies started doing all the things they're doing now. It's a weird time, that's all.
I would say this: Bitcoin also punishes bad actors in the long run, and good actors are rewarded. So if you're a bad actor as an individual, a company, a country, you're going to be punished. If you're a good actor, you'll be rewarded.
I think sometimes that's true.
Okay.
And I think that's where that's where most of the frustration comes from,
in the long
right?
run, perhaps.
Well, that's where the frustration comes from. Some people, yes, they end up in jail or they lose everything. But then there's a lot of people who keep up the game for a very long time, and it's a tough thing to be a part of. But you just got to do in your heart what you think's right.
Fantastic. I love to get the back and forth dialogue going. Defund the criminals, right? Bitcoin fixes this. There's all these sayings that I tend to think people underestimate how much Bitcoin's going to change the world, and it may not fix everything. There's still plenty of things just culturally and values-wise that are outside of Bitcoin that we as individuals need to promote and build. But I want to shift a little bit because some of the design trade-offs with Bitcoin were intentional. One of those things was that layer 1 is a public, everybody can see every transaction ever. And so there's criticism around Bitcoin. How can we move to this world where all these transactions are public? Is that not just the same thing as the current system basically controlling and having visibility into all of our transactions? I'm curious how you guys think about using Bitcoin privately, basically.
Yeah, I get on the first quick comment on the first part and then the second part. I think the openness and the visibility is essential because there's other things, right? Sort of pretending to kind of be a competitor to Bitcoin or whatever, but you don't actually have any certainty over the supply at a given moment because you don't know where that supply's at, right? And similarly, there's other scaling solutions for Bitcoin where it's great, you see how much Bitcoin is sitting there or you know how much Bitcoin Binance has or whatever, but you don't know their liabilities. And so when you have this full, open, transparent view that's pseudonymous, you know every wallet and what their balance is, the foundational layer is important. Now, secondarily, there's obviously things like Lightning, There's things like eCash, there's things like Fedi Mints that, again, like they're not meant for you or liquid to hold your life savings in, but you certainly right now can pay somebody privately where they don't know what you have, you're paying them, you don't know what they have, and people don't know what you have collectively, and so those tools exist, which is great. You know, and ultimately you can move your funds back. Obviously, no doubt, right? When you have a more powerful state, you have AI kind of omnipresent creeping into everything that we're doing. Yeah, I mean, it is still scary. Somebody maybe knows you have a whole bunch of Bitcoin and they don't like the things you're saying. They may not be able to take it from you, but they may know you're someone with a lot of economic value. We can make his life difficult. That is nonetheless a scary risk, and hopefully what we all hope for is Bitcoin becomes this bigger thing, and the money printing, which helps fund those kind of negative apparatuses, gets slowed down. That's yet to be seen, right? We're very likely going to have fiat and dollars and the ability to borrow and states printing money for a long time, and so those are going to be like conflicting narratives as Bitcoin grows, I guess.
Yeah, I don't have much to say on this except the auditability of Bitcoin is essential. You need that. In terms of, you know, privacy features, obviously Lightning helps with that, and I'm super confident in all the builders that we're going to come up with more and more amazing tools. Maybe that's so it doesn't worry me on a day-to-day basis right now. Obviously, that's from a position of privilege. You know, I'm not living in a part of the world where privacy today might be a lot more important. Although we are seeing people, you know, developers, you know, get arrested and go to jail. So maybe I need to rethink that a little bit. But yeah, I think that Bitcoiners are resilient, some of the smartest people I've met, and we will be able to keep that auditability, which is essential, and improve privacy where people don't have to, you know, worry or live in fear.
I have even less to say. Stack sats, stay humble, be careful, spin and replace.
Yeah, it's tough. I mean, so I own a Bitcoin clothing company, right? So a lot of people that I'll say that to, it's like, I don't want to wear a Bitcoin t-shirt, right? Because I don't want to expose myself. But some of us have chosen that we have to walk through the door. That's the only way to like spread the word, and everyone just has to, look at everything from a cost-benefit analysis and decide, you know, do I want to go on stages and speak in front of people, or do I just want to stack sats, stay humble, stay behind the scenes, and everyone is allowed to choose what they want. And yeah, that's how it'll be.
So what would you say Satoshi's vision was peer-to-peer electronic cash? And we've been talking about, you know, the way Bitcoin is designed. My understanding is that 8 billion people cannot have a UTXO. It will, like, mathematically, there's just not enough block space. Only a very small percentage of people will have a UTXO. Do you think Satoshi would be, how do you think Satoshi would be viewing current Bitcoin adoption? Would he be stoked about the kind of place that we're at today, or would he think that we've been a little bit misguided and need a little bit to go back to the cypherpunk mentality a bit?
That's so hard to say, right? I mean, it's almost impossible.
Put yourself in
really to
Satoshi's
say.
head.
Yeah, I mean, like, there's people, some of us who've been here 2015, 16, that you're an entirely different person with a totally different viewpoint then versus where we are now. And then Satoshi leaving, you know, several years before that, right? Well before we even, you know, got far down the road, right? The context is important, but yeah, I mean, like, I don't know. You know, I think that there was discussions early on of like Bitcoin banks, and there was sort of this vision that like maybe not everybody is going to have a UTXO, and I don't know how important that is if you're dealing with like $40 in current value, right? I would love everybody to get there. I want even those, you know, people with less financial means to be able to have still the same benefits of it not being able to be stolen, transactions being able to be blocked, and some of those things exist right now, right? But there's a lot more work we need to do. And obviously expanding the size of the blocks and making sure everyone can do it on chain comes with all of its own other problems, and that's never going to happen where we're at. So I think Satoshi would be proud and happy. I think he'd also be disappointed that we haven't made more progress, probably.
First off, I would say I'm very thankful for what Satoshi gave us, but I would also say, like, who cares? It's up to us what we want to do with Bitcoin for the future. And too many people get fixated on the peer-to-peer cash part of it, although it's super important. For me, it's removing trusted third parties removing the intermediaries. That's the most important thing about that. And Bitcoin continues to do that. So yeah, maybe we're not at the pinnacle in terms of medium of exchange, but that's going to take time. Like everyone said on here, the rails just aren't there yet, but we'll get there. You watch old videos with like when credit cards first started, and there were like 2 businesses except, the Burger King accepting credit cards, and they're like, why would I borrow money to buy a cheeseburger? Like, that's how people thought of it back then. So I'm not worried about any of this stuff. If you think Satoshi's vision, that term is weird because of what they did with it, is peer-to-peer cash, I think that'll happen eventually. But yeah, I think we're good where we're at right now, and it's only going to get better.
To me, one of the most important aspects of Bitcoin is taking down tyranny. It just is. And Bitcoin will be that rock solid base layer of taking down tyranny, disincentivizing evil in this world, and that is the fiat system. So Bitcoin will continue to be the base layer of truth, the base layer of time. Going forward, the technologies built on top of it that we transact with don't actually matter as long as they're tied back truthfully to the Bitcoin base layer. That's all that really matters. And we need to build freedom and protection for all humans on Earth through Bitcoin.
I love it. Thank you guys so much. This has been fun. Thank you guys for listening.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Hello. Awesome. Another great panel. Up next, we got Michael Blankenship from Blockstream, but wanted to make a quick announcement. If you speak Spanish, Bull Bitcoin, their team is having a workshop to learn about Bitcoin in Spanish. If you're interested, it's in the room next door. And if you're staying here, great friend of mine, he's got an amazing talk coming up. Michael Blankenship, give it up for him.
Yeah. How's everyone feeling? Also, how's the distance here? Closer? This is perfect. Good. Great. Okay, so this talk is a recovering TradFi engineer's guide to Bitcoin payments. So, who is this recovering TradFi engineer? Let me give you a very brief run through. So I started out as a software engineer at Capital One, the bank, in traditional finance, doing machine learning and data pipelining and whatnot. Found Bitcoin, knew it was going to change the world, needed to get ahead of it. So eventually got out of that line of software, ran a cross-border payments company. If you've heard of Strike, my company enabled their infrastructure to spread into Latin America. We ran their back-end rails, so we did all of the send globally transfers and all that stuff, if you've heard of that. After doing that, though, and building a consumer product, I got very bearish on that whole thing. We'll talk about that later. And eventually, I landed at Blockstream, and I'm the product lead for Lightning products there and payments. So this experience and like running through TradFi, building a payments company, dealing with international payments, fiat on both ends, it's given me a pretty unique perspective on how to look at Bitcoin and what we're dealing with here and how to make Bitcoin payments actually scale. And I think a lot of people, what they think is holding Bitcoin back is not what is actually holding it back. So let's start here. First of all, who here is familiar with the Lightning Network? I don't know how many newbies we have, but like raise of hands. Great. Okay, so most people. More importantly, though, who here has tried using Lightning even recently and felt like something was off? A couple people. That's kind of surprising. So for the rest of you guys, Lightning works seamlessly? Or you haven't used it? Haven't used it. Okay, a lot of haven't used it. Haven't used it. Okay, so a lot of people. Okay, so let's clarify here. So how many of you have heard of Lightning but haven't used it? Okay, so that fills the rest of the crowd. So either you've heard of Lightning and you haven't used it, or you've used it and it doesn't really work like you thought, right? Okay, so what we thought was going to happen is Lightning is this thing that you download, some app, and then, okay, you just get to make Bitcoin payments instantly, right? It's a banking app, basically. It's your own, be your own bank, we say, in Bitcoin. But that's not what it actually is, of course. You go to make a payment, and then you're told, oh, you need to, well, let's actually do the inverse. You need to receive a payment, and you're told, oh no, error, you do not have the inbound liquidity to receive your payment. Well, my grandma does not know what inbound liquidity is, so she cannot solve that problem. And then, you know, let's say you have a mobile client that, and this is the early days, so this isn't recently, but you have a mobile client and you close your mobile app and someone tries to send you a payment and then it just fails. It doesn't go through. Well, that's because you need to be online 24/7, right? We're getting around this as we build mobile apps that have infrastructure in the cloud and those kinds of things. But also, how weird is it that if you want to make a payment to whoever, I say, well, first, before you make that payment, you need to put aside $50. You want to make a $10 payment for Starbucks, but first you need to put aside $50. It's kind of weird, right? So there's all of these things that go into Lightning, and we've been trying our best to abstract them and like hand it to the individual. And I think we're just looking at Lightning very incorrectly. So that should lead you to think, well, Michael, you're saying Lightning is not for Alice and Bob and Charlie or you sitting here, so who is it for? And the answer is that it's for people that move payments on behalf of other people. These are exchanges, fintech apps, all of those sorts of things. These entities already deal with capital allocation, having to put liquidity to the side. They already understand the calculations for cost of capital and putting it there so they can move it for people, but there's an opportunity cost if they don't put it somewhere else. They already have servers in basements that are 24/7 functional and not breaking. They deal with all of this complexity already. Now, how do I know this is the case? Remember, I said I'm a recovering TradFi engineer. I used to work in TradFi. I'm quite familiar with how that whole system is set up. And what you start to see is that that system is deeper than most people realize. So whenever you go to send money around and you have your you know, wherever your money lives, your dollars or your pesos, you open Venmo. Maybe here you open Bancolombia or Nequi. Everyone hates Nequi now, right? Anyone still use Nequi? No, right, that's what I thought. So you open these apps, right? And they have an extremely simple UX. You don't think about anything. You just think scan QR, make payment, you know, that's it. That's how money should move. That's for individuals. But underneath that, Bancolombia, US Bank, JP Morgan Chase, Bank of Saudi Arabia, they're actually doing some pretty complicated stuff to make that happen. They're, as I said, setting liquidity aside on a daily basis from their normal treasury operations to float that ledger back and forth of like whenever you're making payments. They have servers that are always on and redundant, that even if there is an earthquake in Bogota and it disrupts the Bancolombia servers, down in Cucuta there's another Bancolombia server and you still get to make your payments, right? Okay, and then at the very bottom layer, which this money doesn't really get moved that frequently. And let me just give you an idea here. At the very top layer, if you were to count the number of transactions that move between individuals, on a daily basis, you're talking about trillions of transactions globally, right? If we talk about operator rails, you're talking about hundreds of millions, right? If you talk about final settlement, these are, let's say, tens of thousands to millions, right? It's much less. So now you see that there are orders of magnitude in how many transactions have to move. Well, this is how TradFi is set up. And it's set up that way because at the very bottom layer, you guarantee finality, because that money is not moving that often and it's only when required. In the middle layer, you now enable someone else to take on the operational complexity and get the real-time settlement. And then at the very top layer, you abstract away those things, and now you just deliver the user experience and the UX. Now, if you squint really hard, you start to see a lot of similarities in the Bitcoin space. So I'm going to go back a slide real quick. Sorry if you're taking pictures. Customer balances, operator rails, final settlement. In Bitcoin, customer access, everyday access, operator rails, final settlement. So what am I talking about? Well, let's start with the thing that you've probably heard the least about. And that's because we're incredibly early in Bitcoin payments. No one actually moves Bitcoin around on a daily basis. I mean, yes, I get it. Some of you probably do if you're living on a Bitcoin standard. Most of the world doesn't, is what I mean. And even the people that are in the places that are forced to use Bitcoin, when I visited those places and talked to them, they're not happy with their Bitcoin experience. Like, they still have problems. It's not seamless. They're asking for better, right? And they're asking for better because we've been shoehorning the operator rails for individuals, which is not, it's not the best thing to do. Instead, we should just have a different mindset about it. So, everyday access, this is, again, where users will live. What does that look like for Bitcoin? Well, maybe you started to hear about these things. This is a good pausing point. Raise your hand if you've heard about Arc, Spark, Cashew, or Fedimint. Okay, so most people. If you, and then let's actually do this. Raise your hand if you could explain how any of those things works. Okay, basically no one. Let's try this one. Raise your hand if you think you understand the benefits or trade-offs of those a bit more. That's what I was hoping. Okay, so what these Bitcoin-aligned protocols, is what I'm calling them, what they're trying to do is, whether they know it or not, they're solving for this everyday access problem, this user interface problem. That if I want to send Bitcoin to John, then I just want to see an address, I want to see a QR, I just want to send the payment. And I think nothing about putting aside capital or being online or offline, like, it should just be that simple. So that's what they're trying to accomplish. And then the operator rails, this is where we acknowledge Lightning for what it is, and we stop pretending it's something else. Lightning gives us basically the security of on-chain, but now allows us to accomplish real-time settlement, with the asterisk being, now you have to be online 24/7, put aside capital, rebalance stuff, and do all this stuff. Operational complexity enables real-time settlement, operator rails. And then the bottom, I'm not going to spend too much talking about, you already know how this works. There's Bitcoin. It's on-chain, 7 transactions per second. It's pretty slow. There's no way all of you guys could do your trillions of transactions on Bitcoin. It's Bitcoin alone, I should say, right? And it's where big final transactions are going to take place. So, why is this the case? Well, of course, who here has heard of the blockchain trilemma? Right. So actually the blockchain trilemma is not even just about blockchains. It's really just about payments in general. And any payment space you go observe basically makes these same trade-offs, which is UX, throughput, and security. Those are the three things we're trying to balance. And any one tool you try to build that has maximal in all of them probably is lying to you. So that's why this stack presents itself in TradFi and in Bitcoin. Basically, if we really index, if we use each tool and we index on what is important, then we can accomplish a task really well. And then if you take each of these tools and stack them together, then you can get a pretty good mix of trade-offs while building on a really strong foundation. Okay, I want to take a break because for a lot of people this might be pretty new. This might sound different. I might be upsetting you if you work on Lightning. So I'm curious, is this making sense? Raise of hands for yes. Okay. Is this new? Raise of hands for new. Okay, some people. Great. Settlement at the bottom, real-time, well, finality at the bottom, real-time settlement or the expressway in the middle, and user access at the top. So I think you're getting the picture now. I'm not going to harp too much on Lightning, but I think this is a really good graphic to look at because we sort of can compare some things. So we know about Bitcoin. I won't talk about it, but then we have this expressway, the operator layer, which is Lightning. The custody level, is great. The UX, we've shoehorned it into some individual consumer apps. It's okay. Fees, yeah, it's pretty good. An exit, so if you just want real Bitcoin, let's say, excellent. It is real Bitcoin. When you send Lightning transactions around, it's just a signed Bitcoin transaction. Privacy, it's pretty good. It's not perfect, but it's pretty good. And maturity, it's pretty old in terms of Bitcoin age. Like, we know it's working. We can trust the protocol. Okay. But then there's all these other things that are popping up. Arc, Spark, Fediment. Even the guy who works on Fedi is here. Yeah, he's out there. So if he disagrees with this, he should come. We should come box. No, I would lose. Come on. And Cashew. So these are all things that people are trying to build to deliver really seamless, incredible user experiences for Bitcoin payments. But they have trade-offs. Almost none of them, none of them provide the same self-custody assurances that Bitcoin does if you're just holding Bitcoin, and none of them give you the same security assurances as if you are running your own Lightning node and have your Bitcoin there. Every single one of them tries to do something to... They try to be as secure as they know how to be, or as they can within their protocol. But some way or another, with every one of these solutions, you're going to be trusting someone else at least a little bit in order to get the benefit that now you don't have to be online, you don't have to post collateral, you don't have to rebalance channels. It's not expensive, it's near free. So you get all of these things, you get all of these benefits. But the trade-off is that you do add in a little bit of trust somewhere to someone, and it varies. So here I say custody and exit, and those are kind of the two columns I would look at if I were you. I'll say Cashew, for example. I'm going to call them out because I don't think any of you guys are here. If you're here, then we'll definitely fight. The thing with Cashew is basically a central entity that's issuing you Bitcoin IOUs. And it's basically a digital cryptographic way for a bank. Like, it's a bank, and it's one entity, and that's just it. That's basically Cashew. Now, you get a lot of privacy benefits and these other things. I won't get into those, but like, that's not Bitcoin. That's not what we came for, right? People are clever, and I think Fediment is like an iteration of this eCash idea, but now instead of saying it's a single entity, and you're just trusting them to hold your money and not take it away, maybe you break it up, and it's not just Chase, it's Chase and Bank of America and Morgan Stanley, and then they're issuing you the Bitcoin IOUs. And then you get up to Spark and Arc, and I like their models a little bit better, but there are trade-offs. I won't get into the technicals now because it seems like most of you guys even had barely heard of these, so giving you the technical details of how they work might be a bit out of context. I'm going to talk about trade-offs, though, because I think that's a good conversation. So let's look at Arc, for example. Now, disclaimer, I've never actually used Arc. I've never sent a single Arc transaction. But I have read about it, and I've worked in Bitcoin for some time now and understand a little bit about how the protocol stuff works. Here's what you need to know, though. Even if you don't understand how it works, let's at least talk about what you get and what you don't. Well, with Arc, you do get self-custody. You get to hold your own keys. However, we're going to asterisk on that one, and we're going to talk about that here in a second. You do get instant payments, right? You get simple UX, so you just scan a QR, you make a payment very quickly. Privacy, there's a lot of nice privacy benefits, so you retain a lot of the censorship resistance. And you know, if these guys that are running this Arc thing, so I guess let me say this, right? What does it mean to use this? Really what it means is you take your Bitcoin, you put it into some protocol, which is ran by some group of people, and then they give you something that looks like Bitcoin in return. And then you can move that around. It's not exactly Bitcoin, but it looks and feels like it. Here's the interesting thing, though. There's this thing called a unilateral exit. What that really means is, in the case of Arc, I'm giving Arc my Bitcoin, and in exchange, they give me a Bitcoin transaction that also has Arc information on it, so I can participate in the Arc network and move it around there, and they can, you know, do all the fancy lending stuff that you can't do on Bitcoin L1 and all that. But there's also information on just spending the Bitcoin back on chain. So I give them a Bitcoin transaction, they give me a Bitcoin transaction back. It has some Arc information. It also has just some regular Bitcoin on-chain information. And if the Arc guys, if I go to make a transaction on Arc and I'm like, hey, I'm gonna pay John, but you're the Arc guy, and you just get up and walk out of the room, and you're like, hey bro, I don't care, like, I'm not gonna do your transactions anymore, then that's fine, because I have a Bitcoin transaction that I could give to him and he could process instantly and free and give to you. But since he left, I can use the Bitcoin information, broadcast it on Bitcoin, And now we go back to the layer 1 finality. So I'm not going through him, I go straight to you, but now I have to pay the fees, right? So this is how all of these protocols work. If you've never looked into them, they're kind of interesting, and I'm trying to give you a map for how to think about them. Okay, so what do you give up? Well, this self-custody I was talking about, it's not true self-custody. So in Bitcoin, if you have the keys, then no one else can spend that transaction, right? I mean, we won't get into potential future scenarios and whatnot, but no one else can spend your money if you have the self-custody keys in Bitcoin. But in some of these protocols like Arc and Spark and some of these things, depending if like the people that are running the protocol do some certain actions and behave maliciously, and there's enough of them, and they're all, teaming up against you, then they could like prevent, let's say you sent a transaction, they could just block it, or worse, they could sort of reorder. Well, I won't get into those details, but the point is, it's no longer, you lose some censorship resistance, right? Now, can they explicitly spend your money? That's a whole nother, tangent that I won't take time to get into. But the summary here is that and actually that bottom part is wrong. I would not say real self-custody. This feels like self-custody with much simpler UX, but you trust this Arc service provider, and it can be an entity or a group of entities, to some degree. So you're no longer fully trustless, like you would be with Bitcoin or Lightning. This is an overview of Arc. A lot of these other protocols work very similarly. Now, I want to walk you through a very fun example of in a world that is a parallel Bitcoin and dollar world. So today we're in a world where the dollar is basically how most international entities trade, right? If you're Saudi and you're doing an oil trade with some other country, what currency are you doing that in? The dollar, right? You're not doing it in gold. You're not doing it in Bitcoin. The scenario I'm about to go through only really works when there's enough capital inside of Bitcoin that the world kind of acknowledges that the dollar and Bitcoin are living at least side by side. I know there's a lot of narratives about hyper-Bitcoinization and us living on a globally backed, Bitcoin reserve. Look, I don't want to speculate if that's going to happen or not. I have no idea. But what I do know is at the bare minimum, Bitcoin will live alongside the dollar, right? So here I am telling you about these scaling protocols for user access, operating rails, settlement. Let's look at a transaction that goes from the United States to the Middle East, and Alice is buying her coffee beans from Bob in the Middle East, right? How is this going to work in a Bitcoin parallel world? Well, let's just say we use ARC on the US side. There's a group of banks, not too dissimilar to some of the banking groups that happen in the US, like Bank of America, JP Morgan Chase, and Wells Fargo. And they come together and they are the ARC operators. So those three entities are the ARC operators. Alice opens up her banking app and she sees her dollar balance. She also now sees a Bitcoin balance because Bitcoin is being, treated similarly and whatever. And next to her Bitcoin balance, she can send and receive it. 4 minutes. Oh, wow. This it went by much faster than I thought. So, all right, let me see how I can kick this into overdrive. So those entities work together to issue. Let's say that she earns her paycheck. Those three entities are the issuers of an ARC Bitcoin token. So she logs onto her app. She gets the no-fee instant experience, which is what these deliver. She sends that to Bob's QR, but what happens under the hood is the ARC token hits the collection of banks. The banks then need to go from the Bank of America group that has their Bitcoin to the group of banks in the Middle East that has Bitcoin. Well, they're not going to use on-chain because all the big institutions are using on-chain and it's expensive. But they do have a lightning channel between them. And they're banks, so they know how to do 24/7 uptime and the operational complexity. So ARC payment from Alice to the group of banks. The group of banks then does a lightning payment over to the group of banks over in the Middle East. And then maybe they use Spark over there because they prefer the custody model. I don't know. But then that group of banks in the Middle East then pays out Bob in his Bitcoin aligned layer 2, right? So he also doesn't get Bitcoin on layer 1 or Lightning Bitcoin, but he's getting Bitcoin on this other. Okay, I hope that makes sense. And then the Bitcoin L1 settlement works when people need to rebalance Lightning channels and whatnot, and that's only for the banks and whoever to do. Did that example make sense? Right? And what do I have? 1 minute left? 2 minutes, great. I'm almost at the end. So what I want you to know and what I want you to think about is, what does this mean for you guys? Well, for the masses, probably if you're here, you're not the mass. For the masses, in a Bitcoin parallel world, users don't get actual true self-custody. They get true self-custody with an asterisk, and it's like this slight trust trade-off. That's the best case. In the worst case, we just completely copy banking, and we don't give them any amount of self-custody. So it will be one of these layers that kicks in, and maybe it hasn't even been invented yet, but that will be the user access layer. For Bitcoiners, though, if you're a true Bitcoiner and you really care about self-custody, you really care about censorship resistance, all this stuff's open source. Run it on your own. Run your own Lightning node. You still get the security. You're going to have to deal with the operational complexity. Maybe you can run software to take care of some of it. But yeah. Okay, so here's the ending. I'm ending almost on time. What I really wanted you guys to sit with here is, so now you're reading Bitcoin news, maybe you're on Stacker News, and you're like, I see this new protocol, but I don't know anything about it. Think this way. Which layer is it? Is it settlement? Is it the expressway? So is it finality? Is it real time? Or is it user access? What's it optimizing for? Remember the triangle, security, UX, throughput. And what trade-off is it making? Is it giving up on custody? Does it not have a unilateral exit? Maybe there's no privacy. The point is, Bitcoin alone doesn't scale to billions. Lightning doesn't scale to trillions. So we need something else. And when I say scale, I don't mean throughput. I mean the interface. So we need something else. And it's whatever we're going to end up with at this user layer. And this is the stack that gets us to a Bitcoin global world. So now you know how to read it. I had a slide for questions, but we're out of time. So come up to me. I will try to ask. Can I field like 1 or 2 questions? Team? Can I field 1 or 2 questions? Okay, great. So, 1 or 2 questions.
In regards to self-custody,
Yeah.
which is very important to a lot of us, is it like, I'm a technical guy, not super technical, but is it like, what would you recommend in order to learn how to set up our own Lightning node, for example?
I wouldn't recommend you run your own Lightning node. I'm dead serious. I wouldn't recommend it. Why? Unless you want to nerd out and like learn, unless you just like here's the question. Do you want to run your Lightning node because you want the best experience, or do you want to run your Lightning node because you want to learn? If you want to learn,
in my case, it's about increasing my chances of censorship resistance.
yeah, so in that case, let's say you're an activist, you're fighting tyrannical governments, you should run your Lightning node, and you should do that. Let's talk offline, like just come up to me, we'll talk about the best existing solutions. Oh, I have 5 more minutes. That's awesome, because I'm guessing there's questions. But honestly, you shouldn't try to run your own Lightning node in the sense of run it, like go get the open source software and pull it down to your computer and run it, and like that's dumb. Don't do that. There's software that like tries to wrap it up and give you a good enough interface that you can do it yourself. We can talk about it. If you want the bare minimum that actually still does a good job, but I think they're too expensive, it's Phoenix. Phoenix. Yeah, it's a mobile wallet. You can download it, so you don't even need a computer. You can just use your phone. But they're expensive. Like, yeah. It's still expensive. It's 40 bips, and now I'm getting into financial terms. It's 0.4% per transaction while you use Phoenix. In my opinion, that's still too much. So there's alternatives, and we can talk about them. Yeah, Tom. So the question is, what level of centralization becomes dangerous for the end user? Yeah. Yeah. So what I've settled on through my experience, maybe I'm wrong, is that we will basically rebuild the banking system. But that's not bad. I think most people, it's just because we have the banking word. We're like, oh, banking, bad. It's like, dude, they've spent over 100 years refining how to build the most user effective system, right? They know these pipes. They know how they move. They know why things need to be settled. They know why it needs to be real time. So rebuilding it isn't bad. The problem is, it's your first question, which is when does it become bad for the individual? And I think that comes down to each individual's risk trade-off. What I mean is, an example of his question, let's say you're an activist. You probably care a lot more about censorship resistance than Alice who's buying coffee, right? So you have to mentally understand the trust models, and that's what I'm trying to paint you the picture of, is I hope now you can go in and start to understand these user layers and their trust models. Where are you willing to draw the line? Okay. Yeah, you. So let me actually, so the question or comment was, I disagree that we should trust the banking systems. I never said that. I never said I trust the banking system. So I don't know. I said it's okay if we use the same payment architectures that the banks use, because they know why we're broken into 3 layers. Because you have to break into 3 layers to solve these problems. Yeah. Or sorry, I'm going to go to him because he raised his hand first. Well, so that's actually a great question. So the question is, these user protocols, and just tell me on time. Yeah. The question was, these user protocols like Arc and Spark and Cashew and Fediment, they're giving you something that looks like Bitcoin, but not Bitcoin. So is there a concern that maybe they would like print more than there is Bitcoin. That really depends on the protocol. Some of them are built in such a way such that it's auditable. It's like publicly auditable, and you can verify that like it's pegged. And when you put a Bitcoin in and you get this thing out, everyone can see and like verify. Some of them are not. I'm gonna hate on Cashew again. My understanding, and I've never spent any Cashew, but my understanding is that Cashew is one of those ones where it becomes much harder to verify without some kind of external system that's publishing that information. So you would need additional infrastructure. But just the Cashew protocol, it's like very hard to vet, and you might run into that problem. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Here's what I would say. Don't shoehorn Lightning for users. You should build whatever you think is valuable. So the useful thing as an entrepreneur is to identify what someone doesn't have and give it to them, right? Where's their pain point and solve it. That's what we do. I think you should still build whatever you're building, but keep in mind what tools accomplish what thing and where what you're building fits. Cool. I think that's it. Okay. Well, actually, I have a bit more time, apparently. Any remaining questions? Like, I'll field anything. You can say you disagree with me. We can talk more about disagreements. Okay, let's circle back. Let's go to this guy. Sure. Mm-hmm.
Because most of these don't track and account for the accounting data that you need. Like, who are you actually paying? What is it for? What accounting account does it go to? Which makes sense because we want the privacy in the payment layer. But it makes sense, it seems like, for these other apps to use. It's almost like they're layer 3s that are using the layer 2 to get to the Lightning network or the operating level as you talk. Wondering if you thought about
just to clarify real quick, when you say layer 3, are you talking about the things that I was talking about with Spark and Arc and
talking about
one layer above that?
Yeah.
And
because what you're doing is saying layer 2, which we call Lightning, is really this user layer. Right?
Yeah,
I think on your slides you called it layer 2.
Sure.
So when I say layer 2, I'm talking about applications that sit on
Yeah.
top of those. And yes, they have a better user experience, but your user experience is still talking more about the interaction down.
Just the payment. It's just the payment.
Correct.
Yeah.
I'm saying, I think there are applications above that.
There are.
Thought about that, and what are some of them in your mind?
Well, so I think you are thinking about it the right way, which is, and let me go back. Oh, by the way, if you want to see me talk about this stuff more, here's my Twitter. It's just Michael B. Ship. But we'll come back to this. So real quick. Oh, clicker, not going backward. So your question relates to this slide, which is actually, if you look at the top, I had these things hovering. These are what I consider like, we start to think about applications and not the payment. So the payment will happen, but like you see things like accounting and lending, and some people are building that stuff natively on chain on some of these other things. Now, I hate to bring up Solana and Ethereum. I know we're at a Bitcoin conference, but I'm just saying, people are building them, and we should talk about, like, it is the truth. So what I would say to that is you're exactly right that there's going to be things that take advantage of all the benefits that you're getting with the payment and then aggregate and do interesting stuff. I'm going to be honest, I don't think I have a lot of good ideas on like what all the different applications are, because it's just like what touches money, and it's lending, accounting, all of that kind of stuff. All right, Dallas. And time? All right, Dallas. Clicker? Clicker? Oh, wait. I'm going to be honest. Part of that was I was trying to highlight all the newer things and the things that I thought people would be less familiar with. That's a good point of feedback, though, especially the fact that I work for Blockstream. So those of you that don't know, Blockstream built Liquid, and like I'm up here talking about Bitcoin, and I didn't mention Liquid. Yeah, so here's what I would say, though, because I think the question might be, where do I think Liquid fits? I was telling someone outside this. Liquid is kind of interesting because it's like pretty good at a lot, but like not the best at anything. And that puts it in like an interesting user scenario, because a user might be like, I want the most private transactions, like no one can track me, you know. Well, Liquid is like, again, like we have confidential transactions. We're pretty proud of that. But I'm not sure if that's like, if there's some problem with that or not. But for example, Liquid, you might say, or another user scenario might be, I just want the absolute cheapest transactions. And like Liquid isn't. It's just not. Like it's a few cents, but like some of these we're expecting basically free transactions, right? And yes, it's because the operators are going to subsidize it, but like that's not the point. The point is like if you're just optimizing for free, Liquid isn't free. Another one is the exit. So there's no unilateral exit with Liquid. Liquid is a sidechain. It isn't actually connected to Bitcoin. It's only connected to Bitcoin because we did this like clever peg mechanism, but like Liquid could exist without Bitcoin, and it would just be essentially a shitcoin. It's not. I don't feel like Liquid is a shitcoin, but I'm just saying it could be. That's what I'm trying to say. It's like Liquid's like middle of the road on a lot of things. We're building some cool stuff. It's not out yet, but we're building cool stuff. Okay. Anyone else? Final opportunity, I think. Cool. Oh, one more. Oh. Yeah. This is a brilliant question. I have a lot of thoughts on this one. Okay, so to rephrase, I'll try and make that more concise. Essentially, if you're some business, any business, and you have a lot of Bitcoin, you might not want to just have the Bitcoin sitting there. You might want to like get yield on the Bitcoin. And if you're familiar with Lightning, then you know there's this idea of like routing fees. So if I'm in the middle and I route your payment for you, I make a fee. I make some money. So if I'm having money on my node, Bitcoin on my node, and I route enough payments, I get some kind of yield. So a lot of people have went on stage at really big conferences and been like, look at our yield. And like now, look at Lightning, and you can just deposit yield and like get this stuff. Here's the problem no one talks about. Lightning yield, so when you think of yield in a traditional sense, there's like some borrower to lender ratio or something like this, and then like effectively, it kind of scales with capital, right? Like if you put more and more capital, like maybe the rates drop, but like generally your expectation is that it's holding, right? Like any of these older stablecoin protocols, you would put money in and it would be like 20% yield, and like they tried to maintain it. Really, they were bleeding money. But okay, here's the problem with Lightning. It doesn't matter how much Bitcoin you put on the node. You don't make any more or less yield. The only thing that drives yield in Lightning is how many payments are you routing. So yeah, all these treasury companies, I don't know what they're going to do. I know several of them are going to go throw Bitcoin onto the Lightning Network. And it's going to do nothing because it doesn't scale the payment volume. Only the existing payments that are getting routed on the network are going to be providing fees for all that new Bitcoin. That's one big point. So that's something to think about. I hope that makes sense. If not, I can re-explain. The second very big point on this is anyone that has said they have relatively high yields in Lightning, it's usually because they actually have a very special situation. In the case of Block, for example, Block came out and they said, hey, on a yearly basis, we got like 10% yield on our Bitcoin. But why? Well, it's because they have an exchange. So everyone is going to Block and buying Bitcoin on their exchange. And then what's the natural thing you want to do after you buy Bitcoin? Withdraw it, right? And they have a Lightning node. So they withdraw all this exchange bought Bitcoin, and that gives them all this inbound liquidity to their node. And then they can monetize that inbound liquidity, because inbound liquidity is a hard thing to come by in the Lightning Network when you're operating a node. So those are some interesting points. Yeah. Are you asking me should someone try it? Because I guess that's an interesting question. Yeah. Yeah. Sure. Yeah, I mean, I guess what I'm saying is the use case we just laid out of like people put Bitcoin on the network and get yield, like it's real. It's undeniably a real thing. It's just the yields are going to be very tiny for a long time. So if payments scale on Lightning, those yields will go up. I think something that you should take into account, though, this is an important consideration, is security. So if you're now posting all this Bitcoin on Lightning, Lightning's pretty mature, but it's not perfect. We've seen some like weird attacks even recently where like people have just either lost, it's several things. Like people have like lost Bitcoin and it become like totally inaccessible, or like even you as a business, probably cost of capital is a big thing. So like what if someone griefs you and your Bitcoin is stuck for like a very long time because they've done some like nuanced attack, right? So I think there's just these things to think about. And one more note on that, which is like, in order to have Bitcoin on Lightning, it's inherently a hot wallet. It's online, right? You can't do Lightning with a cold wallet. There's some interesting things in Blockstream. We're working on some stuff with like a validating signer where you have a cold key that still keeps track of some of the information, but this is a very technical concept, and you know, we're building an enterprise product that I think will be quite interesting. Anyway, okay. I think that's it. You can take my Twitter if you want to see what I do, and or email me at Blockstream, or just come up to me. Anyway, really appreciate it. I hope you guys learned something new, and for the next, enjoy the rest. Hope it was useful.
We've got a short video coming up here from one of our partners.
Does it feel like every marketing agency you work with just doesn't get Bitcoin? They don't understand the technology, the culture, or your audience. And instead of saving you time, they end up creating more work. You're stuck explaining the basics, revising inauthentic campaigns, and missing opportunities because of slow execution. In this video, I'll show you exactly why this keeps happening and how to finally fix it, and how you can start getting marketing that's accurate, authentic, and drives real results without the frustration. But first, let me ask you a few questions to see if this makes sense for you. Have you worked with marketing agencies or creative teams that just don't get Bitcoin, forcing you to spend countless hours explaining technical details or correcting mistakes? Do you feel like your current marketing isn't highlighting Bitcoin's ethos or fails to connect authentically with your audience, leaving you frustrated and stuck? Are you pressed for time and bandwidth, needing high-quality marketing delivered quickly, but feel like you're constantly dealing with delays or endless revisions? If you answered yes to any of these questions, you're in the right place. What I'd like to do over the next few minutes is explain why most Bitcoin companies struggle to get marketing that works, how you can save time and stress while creating authentic, result-driven campaign, and finally, if it makes sense, how we can help you achieve this without the usual hassle. So let's get real for a moment. Most Bitcoin companies struggle with marketing because the agencies and creatives they work with simply don't understand Bitcoin. They don't grasp the technical nuances of technology like proof of work mechanics, Lightning Network integrations, or multi-signature wallets. Worse, they miss the mark culturally, creating messaging that feels generic or inauthentic, alienating the very audience you're trying to reach. What does this lead to? Endless onboarding calls, hours explaining Bitcoin basics, and deliverables that require so many revisions, it feels like you're doing all the work yourself. And when speed is critical in the fast-moving Bitcoin industry, these delays and missteps can cost you valuable time, opportunity, and resources. This isn't just frustrating. It's holding you back from scaling your business and establishing yourself as a leader in the Bitcoin space. So, what's the answer? The solution is simple. You need a creative partner who already understands Bitcoin inside and out. And that's where we come in. Creative Network specializes exclusively in working with Bitcoin companies. We bring deep technical expertise, cultural fluency, and a streamlined process to deliver fast, accurate, and authentic marketing without the need for constant handholding. Our services include everything from branding and campaign strategy to content creation tailored specifically for Bitcoin businesses. We make your life easier by delivering work that's ready to go on time, every time, so you can focus on building your business instead of babysitting your marketing. Here's what makes us different from 99% of marketing agencies out there. We speak Bitcoin. Our team has a deep understanding of Bitcoin's technology and ethos. So we hit the ground running without wasting any of your time. We're authentic. We align every campaign with Bitcoin's principles of decentralization, financial sovereignty, and trustlessness, ensuring your audience connects with your message. We're fast and efficient. We deliver polished, professional work quickly, helping you stay competitive in a fast-moving industry. And we care about results. We'll focus on outcomes like increased user acquisition, engagement, and brand credibility, not just pretty visuals. We're not just another agency. We're your partner in building a strong, authentic, and impactful presence in the Bitcoin ecosystem. Our clients have seen great results. For instance, Bitcoin Mining World faced a high-stake challenge, preparing for a major conference where they needed to showcase their new product within an aggressive 2-week deadline. Frustrated by previous agencies that couldn't understand Bitcoin culture, they partnered with us. The result? We created a stunning high-impact product video that became the centerpiece of their conference. It captivated the audience, sparked significant user interest, and drove a surge in signups for purchases, all while solidifying their position as a leader in the space. Similarly, the Bitcoin company needed a complete overhaul of their app's branding. Also frustrated by agencies that lacked a genuine understanding of Bitcoin's spirit and audience, they turned to us. The result? We created all the visual assets for their application, including captivating social media content and a polished App Store imagery, which drastically boosted user engagement, enhanced their app's appeal, and strengthened their reputation as a leader in the Bitcoin ecosystem. So now the question I have for you, do you want to eliminate the frustration of working with agencies who don't understand Bitcoin and start creating marketing that works? If so, here's the deal. Click the button below to fill out a short questionnaire about your business and marketing needs. Once you've done all that, you'll be able to book a strategy call with us to discuss how we can help you achieve your goals. If you're ready to save time, get marketing that resonates, and establish yourself as a leader in the Bitcoin space, click the button below.
Writing code and stacking sats. Let's do it. This summer, I traveled to Bulgaria. We are here.
Welcome to Bulgaria.
To discover how Bitcoin is being adopted and how it's changing people's lives.
We've been through this with a hyperinflation, 292% inflation, and people forgot it.
For me, all these merchants are heroes. The time felt right. We felt a shift.
Something can be changed.
We have really strong motivation to build on Bitcoin.
The end of the road is global reserve currency. The end of the road is the money for everyone.
Humanity is separated in so many ways, and Bitcoin will unify humanity to be one entity. Let's discover everything together in Bulgaria.
All right, let's start. Welcome people back in. We've got an amazing panel coming up here in Spanish. It's the Bitcoin Spanish panel with Ronnie, Alejandro, Monica, and Cassiano. This is going to be a good one. And I'm going to have everyone start trickling back in here when you get a chance.
Hello. Okay, Espanol people, come over. You're gonna get 100 sats.
Oh, 100 sats. Can I
We're
pretend to
gonna
be
get
one?
sats. En español.
¿Y los demás?
Anímense. Sí, pero o aprenden español o qué. Bueno, ¿quién más falta? Uno.
Buenas.
Feel free to get started. Alejandro's making his way in.
But who's the moderator?
Who's the moderator? Ah, ok, perfecto.
I'm
Empecemos.
not gonna dance, so.
I thought you were going.
Tú eres el moderador, ¿no? ¿Ah? ¿Tú hablas español? Español.
Bueno, vamos. Buenas tardes. Acá me llamo Casiano, soy de Brasil. Acá tenemos a Ronnie, cofundador de Bitcoin Hardware Store en El Salvador.
Correcto. Mi nombre es Ronnie Avendaño. Soy el cofundador de The Bitcoin Hardware Store, o la tienda Bitcoin en el español. Y tengo una tienda ahí en Playa El Zonte, en El Salvador, donde todo empezó porque como ahí Bitcoin se hizo moneda de curso legal en el 2021. Yo ahí fue que aprendí de Bitcoin. En El Salvador fue la primera vez que de verdad me enfoqué en la tecnología, para qué sirve, por qué. Y fue en una conferencia, igual a esta, la de Adopting Bitcoin, diría yo que fue el momento que se me encendió la luz. Y de ese momento lo que yo quise hacer era apoyar a mi comunidad con las herramientas que se necesitan, porque en El Salvador, no sé si aquí en Colombia es igual, pero en El Salvador la logística es muy difícil. Tener que tratar con aduanas, con migración y todo lo demás. Entonces yo me puse a platicar con todos los proveedores, a ver si estaban interesados en apoyar un proyecto como el que estoy manejando. Y en la tienda tengo proyectos como, ahí vi que John tenía la camisa de Start 9, tenemos proyectos como Cold Card, Seed Signer, Crocs, todo lo que es código abierto. Entonces eso fue el propósito de la tienda, era apoyar a la comunidad con herramientas que son de código abierto, que son Bitcoin only, para educarlos en la manera propia. Entonces un poco de mi historia ahí.
Muy bien, y acá tenemos también Mónica Bravo, que es una artista multidisciplinar y polymath. Y bienvenida. Y
¿Cuál es la pregunta? Me tengo que ya.
¿Podrías hablar un poquito de su trabajo y cómo es, dónde vives?
Ok, hola todo el mundo, soy colombiana, nací hace muchos años en Bogotá y vivo en Estados Unidos desde 1994, soy artista, creo muchas instalaciones de arte público permanente en hospitales, aeropuertos, escuelas, universidades. Todos los edificios de los Estados Unidos que pertenecen a los gobiernos estatales y federales tienen un programa que se llama el 1% del arte. Entonces, cuando hay una renovación o un nuevo edificio, se aloca 1% del total costo de la producción, o sea, de la arquitectura, a una agencia que maneja el arte. Entonces, yo trabajo por nominación o me toca casi que pedir el trabajo. Entonces es un trabajo que se demora 2 a 3 años de crear y es un trabajo que es de muy como baja preferencia temporal, porque no es hacer una obra y colgarla, sino me toca trabajar con muchos ingenieros. O sea, yo tengo obras grandísimas en la estación de metro de Nueva York, trabajo con animación, trabajo con mosaico, con vidrio. Yo no produzco, entonces utilizo pues la mano de obra de otras personas, pero diseño todo. Entonces manejo budgets grandísimos y tengo la confianza de los gobiernos para que me den el trabajo. Entonces mi trabajo como artista multidisciplinaria. Viví en Nueva York 27 años y en el 2020 me salí del Matrix. Es como, no voy a vivir bajo...
Creo que en el COVID.
Sí, bueno, lo que llamaron COVID. Yo me salí de allá, tuve un sueño, yo soy una persona que tengo como una conexión muy grande con mis sueños y el sueño decía, tienes 3 semanas para irte. Entonces yo, ¿a dónde? A Miami. Ay, yo no quiero manejar, yo sé manejar, pero no quiero manejar, o sea, eso es insurance, o sea, todo lo que pasa con un carro. Y entonces en el sueño me dijeron Miami Beach y yo, ¡ah! Entonces, nada, busqué en el internet y al otro día ya había mandado como 6 meses de arriendo, conseguí un apartamento y me fui. Me fui durante o sea, cuando estaba todo con máscara, eso. Yo nunca usé una máscara, nunca viví COVID, yo no viví COVID, cero. Exacto. Eso. Y ahí yo ya había empezado a comprar Bitcoin, pero la verdad no tenía ni idea que era Bitcoin porque además para mí era como plata mágica. Y un amigo me ha dicho, mira, dame el iPhone y bajamos el app, ¿cuánto vas a poner? Ponga 500 y luego, y eso de Ethereum que es compré más, o sea, de verdad no sabía nada. Y un día pensando dije, ¿no sería más fácil coger la plata en sí y botarla? O sea, como en el inodoro. Entonces dije, tengo que estudiar y lo que decidí fue buscar a algún buen profesor para que me enseñara Bitcoin y conseguí una señora que manejaba. Por favor, allá se bajan el volumen. Hi, guys.
Chicos.
Thank you. Sí, porque no se distrae. Entonces, cuando conseguí como la profesora que me enseñó, me di cuenta que todo era muy bueno aprender, pero necesitaba comunidad, porque la comunidad lo que va a hacer que Bitcoin salga adelante. Entonces me dio por hacer una cosa que nunca en mi vida he hecho, que es voluntariar. Yo nunca voluntariado en mi vida porque a mí me tienen que pagar por lo que yo hago. Pero me fui a la conferencia de Miami Beach, que estaba a 2 cuadras de mi casa, en el 2023, y cuando entré ahí y doblando bolsas y poniendo cosas así, me di cuenta que la comunidad era impresionante, que yo podía tener conversaciones de las cosas más bellas con personas que nunca en mi vida había visto. Entonces ahí dije, voy a hacer un año entero de voluntariado. Entonces fui a Pacific Bitcoin, luego fui a Dallas, a BitBlock Boom, luego estuve en Las Vegas con Unconfiscatable, o sea, hice, y ahí empecé a hacer un network de amigos que son hoy en día gente que yo amo con toda mi alma, porque pues tenemos muchos valores que son similares. Entonces yo dije, voy a dedicar parte de mi tiempo a la enseñanza. Entonces decidí coger el currículum de mi primer Bitcoin, que es buenísimo porque yo dije, ya más yo vengo de familia de educadores. Mi abuela abrió el primer kindergarten en Bogotá en 1939 y mi mamá abrió otro kindergarten en 1969. Entonces mi mamá siempre me dijo con mi abuela que uno debería enseñar lo que uno más ama. Y yo amo Bitcoin. Entonces decidí estudiarlo y no crear otro currículum porque pues está bien hecho, ¿por qué dañarlo? Pero entonces sí lo apropié de manera como con mis imágenes, soy artista, entonces lo pongo pues como mi estilo. Y luego empecé a llamar amigos acá en Colombia a hacerles preguntas, ¿ustedes qué van a hacer con la plata del retiro? O sea, ¿cómo se llama eso? Como las pensiones. Y cuando me decían, no, está haciendo esto, y yo, bueno, hagamos un Excel, a ver de verdad cuánta plata nada. Entonces ahí fue enseñando poco a poco, y luego ya empecé a ir como a grupos en Telegram de comunidades que ya son, por ejemplo, personas que hacen homeschooling o que ya están off the grid, pero les falta la parte del dinero. Entonces yo pertenezco a esas comunidades y a todos los tengo trotando con el Bitcoin. Entonces tengo como una parte muy grande. Yo sigo haciendo arte, y eso me da la capacidad de generar dinero para yo tener mi stack, pero a la misma vez el tiempo lo paso estudiando. Las últimas cosas que he estado estudiando, estudié economía austríaca con Saifedian, sigo estudiando con él. Luego empecé a estudiar ley natural, common law, para salirme del sistema legal, no legalmente, lawfully, es que acá tiene la misma palabra, y es para estar bajo unas leyes que son naturales. Entonces mi intención es que si vamos a ser soberanos, tenemos que ser soberanos no solamente con el dinero, sino con nuestro cuerpo emocional, con nuestro cuerpo espiritual, con nuestro cuerpo psíquico, o sea, físico a todo nivel. Entonces ese es mi resumen.
Muy bien. Y también tenemos acá Reina Chicas, que es directora de educación de mi primer Bitcoin. Creo que también en El Salvador, ¿verdad?
Sí, correcto. Sí, yo pues comencé un poco con Ronnie, creo yo. Tal vez fuimos a la misma conferencia. En El Salvador, pues está ya, estuvo el periodo cuando estuvo Bitcoin de moneda de curso legal. Yo aprendí sobre Bitcoin antes, 2019, el 2020, la pandemia, uno encerrado, pues me dio tiempo de estudiar un poco más y ya me metí, encontré videos de Andreas Antonopoulos y todo eso y dije, ¿y esta gente qué está diciendo? Porque pues que revolución y que no sé qué, pero había tiempo suficiente. Y una de las cosas que yo he ido aprendiendo con Bitcoin, y también hablamos de eso con Mónica, que aparte de, pues obviamente es dinero, es moneda de intercambio, la parte más empoderadora, especialmente en mujeres en Latinoamérica, es el aprendizaje. O sea, tú descubres cosas que creíste que no ibas a entender o que no iba a ser parte de mi vida o que voy a tener que escuchar de alguien más para que me explique. Y claro, seguimos estudiando, pero a partir de ahí, pues adopté Bitcoin en la conferencia en El Salvador, yo fui, quería ver qué estaba pasando y yo sentí que había entrado también como a un espectro de qué pasó aquí, porque en ese entonces, 2021, había todavía pues la que gran hype, pero más de extranjeros, y ver yo también una comunidad tan grande en El Salvador fue bastante extraño, porque creí que era tal vez solo en El Salvador por el momento. Ahí conocí a los chicos de mi primer Bitcoin, que ha sido como, digamos, un shift en mi vida personal al poder también trabajar, generar tu salario haciendo algo que, en lo que tú crees, que porque yo creo mucho también en que puedes unir tu propósito de vida también a la manera de pues ganar, tener un trabajo. No tienes que estar todos los días haciendo algo que tú odias, o sea, que odias los lunes, que ay, qué chivo que ya es el fin de semana. Y eso nosotros tratamos de meterle, digamos, nosotros enseñamos educación financiera basada en Bitcoin de manera introductoria, pero algo que tratamos es también ese shift mental de, es que empodérate, no te quedes acá, aprende algo más y sé pues soberano, no todo es dinero. Eso va a pasar también, creo que a todos nos va a pasar, que nos escuchan y creen que todos tenemos un montón de Bitcoin. Es que tú trabajas en Bitcoin, has de ser millonario. Es como, no, seguimos ganando y gastando, simplemente es tener la mentalidad pues más crítica y de abundancia.
Muy bien. Se ve por el Oculus, por la ropa, que realmente ama Bitcoin, ¿no? Si te encuentro en la calle, te iba a preguntar si es Bitcoiner.
Por todo, bueno, el otro día yo, digamos,
El
vivo
micrófono.
en baja preferencia temporal. El otro día estaba caminando yo en Miami y no me gusta pasar por esta tienda porque tienen cosas que no necesito. Ay, bueno, venga, entremos. Y de pronto, ¿cómo? Sí, no necesito. Y entonces ya me iba a ir y de pronto veo este naranja, dije, ojalá me quede grande, entonces me queda grande, no, me voy. El señor dice, tengo una que es extra small, y yo, bueno, si me queda mal, no, al final, ¿cómo no me voy a comprar esa chaqueta? Es una inversión. Lo mismo con las boticas, pero es lo único. Y bueno, y ahora, si ya uno queda uniformado, es porque es como es el commitment, el compromiso que uno tiene, es lo más importante, y es un compromiso hacia uno mismo, hacia su propia soberanía, hacia la potencia que uno tiene como ser humano para poder contribuir a la civilización. Lo que uno aporta es uno mismo. Entonces puede ser con la ropa, pero la mentalidad o todo lo que uno aprende para enseñarle a los demás. A mí me parece que la educación es absolutamente importante para que esto se propague de una manera que es wholesome, o sea, que es completa, que no le falta nada. Y todos tenemos una parte de Bitcoin porque todos somos Bitcoin. Yo siempre comparo Bitcoin con la mitología de Prometeos. Prometeos le dio el fuego a los humanos y Prometeos fue castigado por eso. Entonces, en algún momento hay que pensar cuál es el fuego que tenemos dentro que nos va a dar la luz para liberarnos. Pero si no buscamos esa luz, vamos a ser esclavos. Entonces hay que preguntar, ¿esclavos de qué? Entonces tú quieres ser esclavo emocional o financiero, entonces hay que cuestionar la autoridad. Yo no le creo nada a nadie, o sea, hago preguntas porque yo ya no me creo nada, porque además hemos vivido, yo nací en los años 60, entonces yo sí que estoy requete programada más que todos ustedes, porque yo he vivido más largo pero también estoy buscando mucha información en la historia, en la mitología, porque los ciclos se repiten. Entonces me gusta mirar esos ciclos para entender por qué lado me entra la luz, porque siempre hay algo que me ilumina y es como, entonces yo sigo estudiando y sigo aprendiendo y sigo queriendo ser inspiradora, porque pues me gusta inspirar a la gente. Y con eso termino, que la palabra inspirar viene del latín de respirar. Entonces uno vive entre dos respiros, el primero cuando naces y el último cuando te mueres. Entonces todo lo que tú hagas entre esos dos respiros es tu vida. Y si tu vida vale la pena porque tú te ocupaste de tus necesidades, fantástico.
Muy bien. Bueno, y yo como brasileño y bueno, creo que todos acá acompañan lo que pasa en el mundo Bitcoin y voy a preguntar sobre El Salvador. Vimos todo el mundo, o sea, los que acompañan, vimos que lo que pasó, ¿no? Tú como salvadoreña sabes más que nadie, más que todos, que cómo era antes, cómo es hoy. ¿Y tú eres también salvadoreño? Los dos entonces, perdón.
Yo soy wannabe. Yo quiero ser salvadoreña, ¿puedo participar?
Y bueno, yo de acá de Colombia me voy a El Salvador por la primera vez para conocer San Salvador y también el interior. Y bueno, yo personalmente, sabemos todos que Bitcoin fue adoptado como legal tender y después del FMI, que es un tema así complicado, lo hicieron sacar el Bitcoin como legal tender. Y cómo fue esto para ustedes y cómo los pegó, cómo es ahora, si ya pasó y cómo es.
Para mí personalmente me cambió la vida, ¿verdad? Porque antes de la ley, pues, y antes de ir a las conferencias, sabía un poco de Bitcoin, pero no era algo para mí, digamos, que le tenía tanta importancia, como dice aquí la Mónica, y que hoy paso todo el día, toda la noche hablando, predicando, intentar de mejorar mi negocio, mi servicio. Entonces, totalmente a mí me cambió la vida. Y eso es esa es la misma historia y la misma inspiración que le quiero dar a la gente de El Salvador. Que uno de verdad puede cambiar el chip, un sistema, aunque es muy difícil porque tenemos años, décadas de ser brainwashed, no sé cómo se dice esa palabra en español.
Lavado cerebro.
Lavado del cerebro. Pero Bitcoin viene y es como un escape. Y yo sé que con mi primer Bitcoin hablan mucho de la filosofía, del dinero, y es súper importante porque creo que la mayoría de salvadoreños todos trabajamos, pero no saben exacto qué es el dinero. Entonces ese es el paso número uno. ¿Qué es exacto el dinero? ¿Para qué trabaja? En la área que vivo yo, que es el Zonte, hemos empezado, hay un nuevo proyecto que ha empezado que se llama Bitcoin Coast, que corre por toda la costa, son como 10 kilómetros desde el redondel de Surf City hasta el Zonte. Y lo que se está haciendo ahí es usando igualmente los programas de código abierto. Estamos usando btcmap.org para seguir creciendo la comunidad, viendo las estadísticas de cuánto tiempo tiene un local de estar aceptando Bitcoin, desde el 2021. Bueno, platiquemos con ese dueño del negocio, qué problemas ha visto, porque cuando todos empezamos, especialmente allá en El Salvador, todos empezó con billeteras de custodia, sea el del gobierno, del estado, que se llama Chivo, o sea Blink Wallet, que antes se llamaba Bitcoin Beach Wallet, que son billeteras de custodia, te lo custodian ellos mismos. Entonces, cuando empezamos, pues puede ser que esta sea la manera adecuada para la gente principiante, pero ya después hay que crear esa comunidad y hay que seguir apoyándonos, porque alguien que tiene un negocio por 4 años, ha colectado Bitcoin por 4 o 5 años, digamos, tiene ya un monto significante, pues hay que enseñarle a esa persona, hay que apoyarle y decirle, ok, mire, usted ya lo aceptó, se dio cuenta que Bitcoin para usted le apoyó a su negocio, porque si no, no lo estuviera aceptando. Tal vez no entiende qué es Bitcoin aún todavía, pero entiende que para su negocio, para su vida, es extremadamente importante de poder aceptarlo y usarlo en la comunidad. Bueno, hoy empecemos a platicar del ahorro, empecemos a platicar de qué en realidad es el poder, la responsabilidad que viene con Bitcoin y apoyémosles a que vayan a la autocustodia. Y eso es lo que nosotros los enfocamos porque en el 2021 hubo este gran relajo, show, que Bitcoin todo esto, Bitcoin todo lo demás, pero ya cuando en práctica no fue así. Y en práctica se empezaron a, bueno, por decir, los salvadoreños hoy, yo diría que el 99% ha escuchado por lo menos la palabra Bitcoin. No sé si, yo diría que la mayoría probablemente creen todavía que es del gobierno, que fue uno de los errores que se cometió. Entonces todavía estamos peleando entre que no, Bitcoin no es del gobierno, ¿verdad? Bitcoin, yo puedo ser dueño de mi Bitcoin. Entonces nosotros, aunque ya 4 años después, estamos apoyando, educando, eso nunca para. Y es lo que dijo Mónica, de todos los días. Me levanto, me pongo mi gorra y bueno, ¿qué puedo hacer hoy? ¿Cómo puedo apoyar a la comunidad? ¿Quién está listo para tomar el próximo paso? Porque al final estamos creando una familia, una comunidad y estamos creando los próximos Bitcoiners, la nueva generación de Bitcoiners que vienen o que van a estar en estas conferencias en unos 2, 3 años también. Porque aquí estuve yo, hace un par de años yo fui el que estuve en la audiencia. Entonces, sí, eso es lo que yo iba a decir.
Pues yo no vivo en El Salvador, soy colombiana, pero yo creo que hay algo que se refleja mucho entre Colombia y El Salvador, es la historia de violencia. Yo soy suficientemente vieja para acordarme de la violencia en El Salvador en los 90, o sea, y yo me fui de Colombia mucho por la violencia. Yo no quería vivir con el susto de que lo van a matar a uno por parquear el carro y decirle a otro tipo, ¡ah! Y la gente disparaba. Entonces, yo vi el ascenso de presidente Bukele y la esperanza que le dio y todas las cosas que han sido positivas en ese sentido. Y obviamente yo a veces digo, uy, Colombia necesitaría un Bukele, que lo tuvimos un poco como con Uribe, lo que pasa es que pues no había Bitcoin en esa época, pero yo sí creo que el gobierno, el dinero y la iglesia tienen que estar separados, porque no funcionan, y como dices tú, o sea, la confusión hace que la gente le tenga más miedo o no entienda bien cómo funciona. Entonces enseñar lo que es el dinero y cómo es importante que el dinero es una tecnología que no la creó el gobierno, o sea, es una tecnología que tú tienes que aprender como usar un iPhone, o sea, sirve, tiene un propósito. Entonces, yo creo que Colombia tiene, y me encanta estar acá, por eso vengo, porque me parece que Medellín tiene mucho, de todas las otras ciudades de Colombia, Colombia tiene como muchas regiones, y Medellín está muy abierta a todo lo que es los empresarios. Entonces yo creo que aquí hay mucho potencial para que Bitcoin empiece a ser utilizado de una manera con educación, no esperar a que el gobierno lo vuelva legal tender, porque no creo que esa es la solución, sino que nosotros sigamos educando, sigamos usándolo, creando la comunidad, que mi amiga que vino acá le hable a los amigos y el próximo año vengan más. Así es como se crece con la educación. Entonces yo sí soy como bullish de Colombia y quiero que la gente aquí entienda, aprenda, dedique tiempo a aprender, para saber ese conocimiento.
Hablando del contexto también, lo que decía Ronnie, que porque eso nos pasó mucho también con mi primer Bitcoin, queriendo ir y enseñar, era como si te caía, si te gustaba el gobierno, entonces te gustaba Bitcoin, si te caía mal pues el presidente, entonces no te gustaba. Por eso yo también soy de la opinión que no debería de venir de un gobierno, todo debería ser lo que nosotros llamamos grassroots, es de parte de la comunidad. ¿Cómo confías tú mejor cuando alguien te dice, ay, si ese restaurante es rico? No es en serio en sí por el reel que tuviste en Instagram, es porque alguien te dijo, yo fui y comí ahí y está rico. Acá están los chicos, que bueno, justo las voy viendo, de Satoshi Team, que ellas te están ayudando, on board merchants acá, y que hace la diferencia que alguien de tu comunidad vaya y te explique. Y lo que dice Ronnie es tan cierto de tomarse el tiempo y de saber cómo tú vas a servir. es que de qué manera tú vas a servir a la comunidad, o sea, no te vas a quedar con todo el conocimiento, uno aprende mejor cuando enseñas. Y yo quiero contar una historia corta, entonces es un poco curioso porque todos creo que tenemos en la familia algunos que son más sociables, otros que no. Yo tengo un tío, es el hermano de mi papá, que raramente lo vemos, él es muy introvertido, a él no le gusta salir, nunca lo vemos y siempre se le invita a las cosas familiares y nada. Entonces, el otro día me llamó y dije, Dios mío, algo va a pasar o algo, porque pues, tengo tanto de no verlo. Y en eso él como que encontró uno de los tantos podcasts y me dijo, Reina, yo no sabía que usted estaba en Bitcoin y pues qué orgullo, que usted es de la familia. Y yo, ok, como muy sorprendida. Y en eso él me contó que había ido a Bitcoin Hardware Store y yo, pero si este señor no sale de su casa, ¿cómo fue de San Salvador hasta allá? Y me dijo, yo conocí a Ronnie, usted lo conoce. Y a mí me llena como de tanta emoción que alguien que pues a lo mejor él no me buscó a mí o no sabía, pero vas y le dejas una buena impresión a la gente. O sea, él me dijo, muy buena onda, Ronnie, yo estuve tratando de ir aquí y allá para aprender y pues como que nadie me lograba explicar y él se tomó el tiempo y la paciencia. Siempre no nos olvidemos que lo poquito que nosotros hemos aprendido, otra persona para ellos, eso no es nada. Nosotros a veces subestimamos el valor que le podemos dar a alguien en una conversación, a veces suelen escuchar, en intercambiar ideas, y lo mismo pasa con Bitcoin. No es como ir, ay Dios mío, acá no se tienen que poner los lentes anaranjados, ¿verdad? Desde el inicio. Es como que sí. Yo ahorita fue casualidad, se los quité a Quentin por el sol, pero sí tener como esa conciencia que una interacción le va a cambiar a veces la perspectiva a alguien de cómo ve la conversación. Es como, si vas y es, ay no, ahí fui yo a esa conferencia y la verdad que todos muy creídos, no puse, porque allá también ha habido, somos humanos y creo que esa es la parte que se nos olvida a veces, que pues somos imperfectos y no todos nos vamos a caer bien y no necesariamente porque todos estamos en Bitcoin todos tenemos que llevarnos bien, está bien tener desacuerdos y es simplemente también, porque eso está pasando también ahorita en el mundo, es como o es blanco o es negro. Y es
naranja.
Y es naranja. Cierto, es naranja. Pero tener buenos como arguments, o sea, tener buenas conversaciones, agree to disagree está bien, escucha tu opinión, escucha la otra y lo respeto. Nos gusta un influencer en Bitcoin, a algunos les gusta Michael Saylor, a otros no les gusta, está bien, pero no ser también al seguir alimentando tanto like hate que hay, es como que si eres Bitcoiner o no lo eres, porque al final para eso estamos aquí, para ayudar a más personas a lo que nosotros hemos encontrado. Y si no, sería como muy egoísta de nuestra parte también quedarnos y seguir como rondando con los mismos amigos. Salgamos de la zona de confort y vayamos y contémosle a alguien que no ha escuchado y que también nos reta a nosotros, a volver a, ¿sabes qué? Eso no lo sé, voy a ir y volver a preguntar y tener la humildad suficiente. Yo voy a ir yo, Ronnie, y independientemente que yo trabaje en una organización de educación, yo le digo, Ronnie, no entiendo cómo funciona esto, y explícame, y entonces hagámoslo y así ya vamos a tener las herramientas para enseñarle a alguien más.
Bueno, nuestro tiempo se acabó, pero podemos abrir para una preguntita. Ryan, ¿una pregunta o no? ¿No? Afuera.
Nos echaron.
Someone has any questions? Si alguien tiene alguna pregunta, vamos a tener que salir por el tiempo.
Vamos allá a mi salón.
Pero
afuera.
sí, ahí están los workshops, todo.
¿Nos podemos llevar los micrófonos?
Ya no nos dejan.
Los quitaron.
Gracias.
Gracias.
Ok, ¿cómo sentimos aquí, Colombia? En inglés, pero un poquito de español antes. La primera vez, muchísimas gracias, Colombia. Es mi primera vez en el país, pero viví en Venezuela, pero la primera vez aquí en Colombia y es un honor estar contigo, con ustedes. Muchísimas gracias. All right, let's dive in. I'm sorry, I'm going to go to English now. My apologies. But I wish there was more Spanish speakers here. It was wonderful to hear that last panel. So I'm going to talk a little bit today about when we talk about Bitcoin, when we write about Bitcoin, being sincere about that. Now, I'm not saying that we're not sincere when we talk about it. I think we are. But I think sometimes we can rely on maybe slogans or like, well, that's what Jeff Booth said, so I'm going to repeat that. Or that's what Lynn Alden said, so I'm going to repeat that. But we want to try to go past that. So, I'm not sure we have maybe batteries. Is there which way do I point? Do I have to point in a specific direction? Okay, thank you, no worries. I could just signal over to you to press the space bar. Yeah, no big deal though. Okay, a question to the audience. Let's start with this. I can't do it, but I don't know if you can. Could I point over to you guys? Yeah, is that okay? A little bit of help. I made maybe too many slides if this is going to be the setup, but a quick question. So who likes to be heard? Who here likes to be heard? How do I know that that's the case? The woman in the bright orange jacket loves to be heard. Amazing. I think you're lying. I think we got mentirosos here. So who likes to be heard when they speak and they say things? Okay. I do too. We can go to the next. Okay, we're good? There we go. I think we all like to be heard, and especially when we're talking about Bitcoin, and sometimes when we talk about Bitcoin, especially to loved ones, we don't necessarily feel that we are heard. So what I'm going to talk about today is ways that over the last 4 or 5 years, my profession has been writing about Bitcoin, which is a tremendous privilege, something that I have never taken lightly. And it took me a long time to be heard. Some of you probably heard my name in the last maybe year or two. But for the first year or two that I did this, very few people were listening, and I realized it was because I wasn't totally sure about what I was saying yet. So it took me some time to find my own voice, to find my own way. And the reason that I share this is not just so that maybe you can go and get a job in Bitcoin or something like that. It's because it will inevitably bring you on a journey, both finding your voice, putting yourself out there, whether it's writing about it, making videos, doing something else in the space, and also following your curiosity with this. And I'm going to dedicate this talk to the woman in the back, Reina Chicas, who's back there. I saw her speak at Adopting Bitcoin 2023. The year before, she had gone to that conference because she was curious to hear what Bitcoin was. The year after, she was speaking on the main stage in her second language. So give her a round of applause, please. Let's start with that. That is the testament. She's the example of what it means to follow that curiosity, to put yourself out there, and to then travel the world telling people about what you do and sharing your experience with others. So on March 1st, 2021, I published my first Substack. At the time, I had been studying Bitcoin for a few years. At the time, I was more focused on price. I don't think about its price as much these days, but this is what I was focused on then. I published this. And I'm just ready for the world to tell me how brilliant I am, and ready for the world to say, like, Frank, thank you for sharing this with us. You've worked so hard to understand this. We really appreciate it. Instead, I got family members telling me I was a scammer, friends telling me I had lost my mind, colleagues. I was a college professor before I moved into writing about Bitcoin full-time. Colleagues telling me that, there was going to be no future for me in this. I did this twice a week, and I did it as a challenge to myself. I used to tell my students, if you want to see where the gaps in your knowledge are, write about something. You will very quickly see what you don't understand about that thing. So I told my readers, I said, this is not financial advice. This is not the definitive book on Bitcoin. This is a human being trying to explore something that they don't understand very well and doing that in a public manner. So I published every Thursday and Sunday religiously to make myself continue to have to learn about Bitcoin. In, I think it was, September of 2022, I wrote this piece for NASDAQ. I had gotten a job in the business, and I wrote a guest piece called Bitcoin is a Store of Values. Alex Gladstein retweeted it, Alan Farrington retweeted it, and my nervous system wasn't ready for that. It got a lot of traction, maybe tens of thousands of views, but it took me a year and a half to get to a point where I felt like I had not only something to really say, but I condensed it into a way that felt like, okay, this is the way I want to say it, and this is how I want this to come across. And I got a little bit of clever with the headline, but it did take a while. The reason I say that is because when we initially put ourselves out there and the world doesn't respond and we don't get 1,000 likes or 1 billion retweets, a lot of us recoil. And the idea is to sort of try to be calm in those moments as we're trying to put ourselves out there and to continue to move forward anyway. It wasn't until I really knew what my purpose here in the Bitcoin space was until I interviewed a gentleman named Luthando Nabambi, who, is anyone familiar with Bitcoin Akazi? Bitcoin Akazi is a circular economy in South Africa. In this interview, Luthando told me how because of Bitcoin, not only had he moved out of the shanty town or the poorer part of town in the township where he lived, he had stopped drinking. He spends more time with his wife and children. And I had this moment where everything else melted away. And I said, Bitcoin must be protected and it must thrive so that we have a quadrillion more Luthando Nabambis on this planet, that this story becomes ubiquitous, that everybody who takes the time to understand this and engage with this system can take themselves out of that. Now, was I perfect? I ended up taking a bunch of other opportunities, some of which I had a lot of success with. Oh, actually, one of the slides might be missing. I ended up in being the White House correspondent for Bitcoin Magazine, which was quite a thrilling experience, but none of that made me feel anything like it did to be interacting with people in circular economies, people who were traditionally unbanked or underserved. It just had a different appeal. So even when I sort of found it, I also kind of lost it a little bit, and now I'm back to writing about this predominantly. So pay attention to the way what you're covering makes you feel, because if you're covering it, or you're writing about it, or you're thinking about it, and it really isn't where your heart is at, you're probably going to burn out, whereas otherwise you'll continue to do, ideally, some of the best work of your life. And again, please apply this beyond writing. Try to focus, whatever it is where sort of where your passion lies. It's very catalytic. It can have a very catalytic effect, and it's important to pay attention to that. So there's something I also want to point out is that a lot of us share something on Twitter or on Nostr and amongst sort of other Bitcoiners, and we love getting the recognition. We love preaching to the choir. We love, oh, Frank, that was so smart, and we're already talking to people who have a deep understanding of Bitcoin. But I think what we're missing is that the opportunity is often outside of that. Most of the world doesn't understand it so much. Right? So preaching to the choir can have certain benefits. That's great. And we're constantly slowly expanding that circle of how big the choir is. It's great. But I'm going to give an example of when I kind of stepped out, or the moments that I've stepped out of that, and what some of the results of that have been. So the main thing that guides the way that I write and the way that I approach the work in the Bitcoin space that I do is that hope is more powerful than fear. When I first got involved with writing about Bitcoin, I was more antagonistic. I think part of that was the people in my life telling me I was wrong. I became defensive. I became antagonistic. A lot of us like to end the Fed, central banks will burn, blah, blah, blah. These are things like, maybe I just couldn't say these things in the White House, so maybe I just moved over to hope. But Bitcoin as a tool for human rights, talking about Bitcoin, giving examples of people's lives who have been bettered, far more powerful and more sustainable than constantly fighting with the old system. I think even fighting with the old system, we're lending some of our energy to it instead of building in this new system. So I point out these two stories because the one to the left, I wrote about a Bitcoin circular economy. It's called Afribit. It's in Kibera. Kibera is the biggest slum on planet Earth and on the continent of Africa. I wrote this piece for Forbes because part of what I tried to do now, and I'm not saying you have to aspire to do that, but the mainstream narrative is either the financialization of Bitcoin, or in some cases, Bitcoin is still a scam. But I tried to push things into the mainstream that will eventually force people to look at it. With that piece, a correspondent from the BBC read the piece, said, this kind of seems legit, went into the slum himself, into Kibera himself, couldn't find anything that was wrong with the situation, and the BBC did a 5-minute piece on what was happening and how lives were changing as a result of this Bitcoin circular economy in Kibera. And I say that because if I were just out there posting a bunch of negative tweets and posts about the BBC saying how terrible they are, they don't get Bitcoin, I probably wouldn't have had that effect. But leading with hope, saying it's impossible to look away from the way that these people's lives have been changed, was the thing that made that correspondent go into that village, see it for himself. And at the end, I think they have one economist say, but Bitcoin is volatile, because they just have to do something like that. But that was it. The other thing, and I try to bring, wherever I see something that's I think is just underreported or that the world should know, where you can tie it to a real world use case, I try to do that. And I recommend that, again, on whatever level you do this, whether it's retweeting a post, posting your own post, it's important. The number one way that money was being received and aid was being distributed in Jamaica as a result of the last hurricane was through Bitcoin. But there's an app called Flash that was built by a gentleman named Dredd in the Bitcoin space. And this app was, when the banking infrastructure shut down as a result of the hurricane, when everything else wasn't working, it was not only disseminating the Bitcoin, but it was acting as an on and off ramp. And it was getting people to be able to help people that were working with the team, the Flash team, were helping to distribute aid. And again, some people from the mainstream media took note of this piece. But again, it doesn't have to be in Forbes. It can be any of us amplifying any of these stories to whatever capacity that we can. And wherever we see Bitcoin solving a real world problem, this is how we change the narrative. Because again, you'd have to be, I say this jokingly, but you'd have to be a sociopath to be like, Bitcoin is evil if it's helping these Jamaicans who were impacted so deeply by this hurricane. I wrote this piece because I knew a lot of people were looking at me thinking I had just become like a super MAGA Trump supporter, whatever, because I worked in the White House. Me being a White House reporter has nothing to do with my political beliefs. But I wrote this piece with a certain group in mind. So I had done an interview with some people who were on the ground in Nepal. And in Nepal, we just saw young people overthrow the government. And there was a lot of talk about BitChat being used and Bitcoin being used. And when I interviewed the person, he's from a village in India right by the border of Nepal. He had a lot of friends on the ground in Nepal. When I interviewed this person, he said the majority of people there won't use Bitcoin because they look at it as an extension of capitalism, and most of the social workers and the aid workers and the people there, they don't want anything to do with that. They're far more to the left and blah, blah, blah. This piece ended up spreading around a little bit, and I used to teach at a university in Japan, and one of my coworkers has a very, very far left coworker who read this piece, and it changed the way she looked at it. And it was a piece talking about our ability to offset inflation. I quoted a situation in Kenya, or just abilities to be more financially inclusive, as I just mentioned with the situation in Kibera. So the ability for people to take part, to be able to have, to not necessarily have to go through the traditional systems, most of which won't even allow them into it because they don't have enough balances in their bank, a high enough balance in their bank for that to be the case. I'm running a little low on time, and I don't want to cut into the next talk. So this is very quickly how I've synthesized it. When I talk to people about Bitcoin quickly, I try to